Yeah, you should be muted. 1 second. Sound check, Carson.
Loud and clear. You guys are live.
Well, welcome to this special council meeting, Thursday, February the 8th. And I'd like to acknowledge we're holding this on the traditional lands of the Klamath Nation. And we'll start with the adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
Seconded. All in favor? New business. Council Code of Conduct Workshop. I would like to invite our CAO and our facilitator to give us an overview.
This is the Code of Conduct workshop that you directed staff to bring forward to last year. And it's with great pleasure that I want to introduce to you Alison Habkirk. For the audience, Alison comes with experience both as a municipal employee, manager, leader, and as well, also having had the privilege of serve Saanich, is it the district of Saanich? Central Saanich as a mayor. So she has worn 2 hats and is a highly regarded local government leader, has taught MATI courses, has also supported the Local Government Management Association. This morning, for your benefit and for the audience's benefit, she helped lead a discussion with staff on leadership, teamwork. It included some discussion with staff around ethics and how we want to serve you in the public. So today, I'll hand it over to her to run through the agenda and introduce herself further. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I spent 3 terms on my council, 2 as councillor and 1 as mayor. So I have some appreciation of the challenges of the job. I admire you for taking the job on, and hopefully today will be helpful to you. As I understand, the purpose of today is to help you craft a code of conduct for yourselves. And I've been advised that the starting point would be the regional district code of conduct that's in place for the regional district. That would be a good place to start, and I've had a chance to review it, and I think it is a good place to start. I think where we hope to be, in terms of my point of view about what we hope to accomplish today, is we circulated a series of questions for you to consider, and I hope that we'll walk through those, and also we'll come to some consensus about what kind of code of conduct, what are the details. It might look like, oh, we just adopt a code of conduct, but there's a whole series of questions that you need to wrestle with. And these are entirely for you to wrestle with, completely within the authority to make these choices. So I hope by the end of this, we will have worked through those questions, and you will have come to some point where you can give some direction, and that code of conduct could be drafted for you then. I'll just say that I came to be involved with codes of conduct kind of through the side door in a way. I think I've always had an interest in kind of the accepted norms of council behavior, and they've changed over time. And I just found myself with an abundance of clients that were challenged. Municipalities across BC that have had, conduct issues. And since the new legislation around codes of conduct, since the introduction of the foundational principles of responsible conduct, the document that I've noted here, Forging a Path to Responsible Conduct, which I was part of the team that guided the creation of that, I just have increasingly become interested in this area, and more recently been involved in a number of disputes and complaint processes in various cities around BC. So I'm not a lawyer. I don't pretend to be an expert. with a lot of, with some experience, some harder experience, I might say. So that's what I think today is about. And this is intended to be an informal workshop kind of discussion. I'm hoping it will be that, because it'll be most productive. But set your expectations about what we're here today.
Mhm.
I see nodding heads. So I was just going to talk a little bit about, why we have codes of conduct and what they are in BC. As you're aware, there's legislation now that requires you after the election. I assume you've already done this. I'm not sure if I've asked Lisa. Yeah, you have to do check-in. Do you want to have a code of conduct? You're not obligated to, and the details of the code of conduct are not detailed in the legislation in any way. Again, it's completely up to you to determine what is in the code of conduct. So every community has to at least consider whether or not they have one, and then they have to figure out what's in it. And really, I think I've been in local government for a long time now, as Lisa said, starting as a staff person. I just say that norms around behavior around council tables has changed over time, and maybe the expectations of the public too. And so increasingly, it has become important to actually write down what the accepted norms are. And then I would say in the last 5 to 7 years, there has become a drive for councils to acknowledge behavior that they think is not appropriate, not meeting the standard that they want to achieve, and in some cases sanctions and enforcement. So that has just become more and more common. I'll tell you, 5 years ago, there were questions about the council's authority to sanction and enforce provisions in codes of conduct, but I think that there's no longer a question about that. I think most of the things, certainly the things in the regional district code of conduct, most of the enforcement measures, I think, are well accepted across the province now, but this is very much an evolving area. And every year we see kind of a new generation of codes of conduct. So I think local governments across BC are really learning from each other and improving what's in the code of conduct. I'll just say that code of conduct isn't a magic bullet. It's not going to solve all your problems. It lays out standards of behaviors, your expectations for standards of behavior, but it's not going to solve all conduct issues. And I will say, and again, just based on my recent experience, sadly, the kinds of sanctions and, the complaint processes don't always end up getting to where a council really wants to get to. And it's my perspective that code of conduct complaints should be reserved for the most egregious behaviors, things that are really, really serious and shouldn't be, complaints should be considered for really trivial matters. And I'm working in one municipality right now that has 16 active code of conduct complaints. And, sadly, I think in that case, even though there are real problems there, the code of conduct complaints they become not very meaningful, right? They're just expensive processes. So I just say that just as a way of, I think most of us that were involved in the early days of codes of conduct really expected that complaints would be reserved for the most serious things. And generally, I would say also, the more personal a complaint is, the more long-lasting the disruption to the organization could be. So you really want to be cautious about how, when you lodge complaints, and be conscious of the impact that it has on their organization, both around the council table, because obviously complaints will affect the relationships you have around the council table, but also on your staff, because the kind of, the critical nature of a code of conduct complaint will unnerve the staff. It shakes the stability of the organization. So, you have to think about those impacts too, and of course, just the reputation of the organization. So just a couple of thoughts. Any questions about that? Any questions about what other municipalities are doing? Or yeah.
Yes, the question is, do you have an example of a municipality that has a code of conduct and had a specific training program for all elected officials so they could focus on their job and thereby potentially minimize the need for any type of action resulting from a code of conduct?
Do I know of an example of it? Well, I think most municipalities try very hard these days to offer really good orientation programs post-election. I understand you have one. And then you would hope that there would be a component of that would include training around your code of conduct. And, now you came into office there's no existing code of conduct, right? So it wouldn't have been for you, but I would think any community that does have an existing code of conduct would have some training around the code of conduct. I think also, and then, there's this requirement to review the code of conduct, change it if that's what they want to do. So presumably there would be some knowledge building there. But I think also it's pretty common these days to have a number of different specific training sessions for elected officials. So bullying and harassment training, safe workplace kind of training. Often, Indigenous knowledge training. Very often social media training, communicating with the media broadly training. So all of that, I think, would be supported. You would hope it would be connected to the standards you set in your code.
So you're not aware of a model?
Oh, I think there's one real model community in BC. No, I no, because I think that everybody's at every local government is at a different stage. So no, I think there are good codes of conduct around BC, but they're evolving even, post-election, this last election. I know of 2 councils specifically that adopted a code of conduct and within 3 or 4 months amended it. So very much an evolving area, I think. I just also want to say that, that 75% of all municipalities in BC have a population of less than 15,000. The vast majority of municipalities in BC have very small populations and, limited resources, just like your community, right? And so this is new work. It's not necessarily inexpensive work. And it's been a challenge, I think, for many communities.
Absolutely.
I'd just like to give a little bit of background about the Cathette Regional District Code of Conduct, where I came from. I came from a union workplace environment, elected union workplace environment, and we did a lot of work on respectful workplace policies when those were brand new concepts and didn't exist, but really are the same thing as a code of conduct. If we look at the bones of it, going through creating it and creating enforcement or the process to go through and investigations and all that,
right,
and see the different ways those can go well or wrong. And at the regional district in the first term I was on there, saw a need for a code of conduct and set up a committee to create a code of conduct, and it was about a 2-page code of conduct.
Yeah.
But it was created more or less in the middle of the term. And about the same time it was being created, there was a conflict situation going on, so people were taking sides on which side of the conflict they wanted to be on and how they wanted to deal with a particular issue with the conflict. So, you know, the first code of conduct wasn't particularly effective. And the UBCM came up with its models and encouraging codes of conduct. And we ended up, after a whole bunch of meetings, creating what's here. And,
Right.
you know, the idea of having some actual enforcement power.
Right.
Was a really real discussion of the board about whether or not any enforcement should be there or not. And what's in this policy came out of a lot of discussion, a lot of legal opinions that
Yes.
the board sought along the way at different stages.
Yes.
And, you know, it's, you know, Councilor Elliott's on that board too. And I think the atmosphere of that board is different under this code of conduct. Conflict is not the same as it was previously.
Well, that's good to hear.
By the time I've been involved in this, it's that code of conduct since before it originally began.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah.
I think it's a good one.
Yeah. And I think,
It takes actually the good faith agreement with everybody around the table actually sign on and agree that they're going to try to abide by it, because that's what makes it work.
yeah, right, sorry for interrupting, but I think that that story you tell is really a typical story across BC. Is that many local governments started with a 1 or 2 page code of conduct, often just including the foundational principles of responsible conduct and nothing else. And you can see that now they include some of the community charter provisions and then a whole enforcement piece. But I can tell you 5 or 6 years ago, there was, I don't know of a single code of conduct that had an enforcement piece, maybe North Cowichan, District of Cowichan. So it's been a real evolution and it is still evolving, very much a new area of practice, I would say.
Yeah, one question, you mentioned so many of the municipalities across our province are quite small and lack a lot of resources. I was looking at the draft code of conduct from Nanaimo, they reference a commissioner. And so, I mean, I think at all costs, the idea would be to avoid having to get to the point of doing an investigation and having to carry things out. What are some models of ways that small communities, and maybe it's just too early in the process, but what are some models of smaller communities and how they approach code of conducts and in the consequences or investigations that are mentioned within, that aren't onerous on staff or onerous on finances? Are there examples of what that could look like, or what helps avoid getting there?
Well, interestingly, I'd say that code of conduct has a 3-step enforcement process. So the first one, an uber informal process. So where you really try to sort it out before you bring anybody in, right? And then if that doesn't work, you bring in a mediator trying to resolve it informally. And if that doesn't work, then you go to a formal investigation. And it's really, you know, that 3rd step that can be really costly and time consuming. So I think really trying to resolve things amicably early on will help reduce the cost and the impact on the organization, the sort of cultural impact on the organization, trying to deal with things early. Hopefully, you know, reasonable minds will prevail. Apologies will be given. People can sort out their differences, respect each other's opinion. Doing that early is going to minimize the impact and reduce the costs. Maybe you need a mediator. That's sort of the medium level. And if that doesn't work, so I think that's a very good process. It's not easy, especially if emotions are high. Can be quite challenging, but I've been involved in one process where emotions were very high, and I was brought in and Lori was brought in to just do that very early informal resolution process. And we were successful in that. And I would say that's the best of all possible paths. The 3-step going directly to a commissioner or some investigator or, yeah, it's going to get you right into high cost territory.
Thank you.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm curious about, like, we're talking a lot about enforcement, and I think what we need to talk about is resolution. And if there are smaller communities that maybe rely on things like justice circles or some processes that have been known to land better around resolving things as opposed to finger pointing, and whether that's out there or if that, you know, more of an indigenous circle type of way of enhancing team building, resolving interpersonal conflicts, and talking about what's harmful and who's harmed, and giving them time to help others understand, so that we move toward better functioning, closer knit teams, right? So I see the point of all of that, and it's very businesslike, and sometimes it doesn't necessarily highlight resolution, but rather, so accountability, yes, and we need to be accountable, but sometimes accountability forgets that we're also in community and need to be a team. And how do we focus more on resolution and less on who to blame?
Well, I think, you know, first of all, there are preventative things we can do. Again, all the kind of training that was talked about earlier, you know, bullying, harassment training, cultural awareness training, you know, training for the job itself. All those things I think are preventative because it helps you work with each other, it helps you to learn what's legal, what's tolerable, what the norm is around this group. So I think all those preventative things are really, really positive. And then you hope that when people have disagreements, that they'll talk to each other and sort of, just as you're saying, right?
Yes. Can we fill that out?
Well, I think the code of conduct, the code of conduct refers specifically, and maybe if we can just go to it.
Yeah, they mentioned.
Says, you know, strongly, with the most strong force encourages informal resolution, right? Shall put, and this is sort of, section 15.5, shall put forward every effort to have the parties resolve their differences informally through discussions between the complainant and the respondent. But I think there's a step before that, because before there's ever even a complaint made, one would hope that you would talk to each other and come to some understanding. And this is what you're doing. Come together, talk, resolve your differences. But if it gets to the point where a complaint is submitted, then these are the three processes. Starts with informal, goes to mediation, goes to enforcement. Those are broadly referred to as enforcement.
Okay, what I'm going to do now is ask, are we getting into subjects that you're going to cover and would be more functional if you continued along with the time that you have here, and then
I'm happy to, and here I was going to just go through the agenda. What I'd like to suggest you do, I have a couple of other things that I just want to touch on. But I want to actually walk through the CAFET code of conduct. We can answer any questions just so that you know where, you know, what we're talking about and that the starting point is. And then I'd like to go to the questions specifically and have a discussion around it. Does that suit you? I just want to say something about your oath of office. You know, it's very straightforward. It does include, again, the foundational principles. These 4 foundational principles you'll find on page 2: integrity, respect, accountability, leadership, and collaboration. Those are the foundational principles of responsible conduct. EBCM, the Local Government Management Association, and the Ministry all endorse. So your code of conduct, or I'm sorry, your oath of office includes those, and it also includes a commitment to work within the law. And so it's a very simple but important commitment when you get elected and you take your oath of office. The code of conduct is obviously much more fulsome and detailed. So I would just say the code of conduct builds on the fundamental principles included in the oath of office. Just wanted to mention that. So can we walk through the Catholic code of conduct? And again, if you have questions, let's just talk about them. I just thought I would highlight some of the key areas that I think you need to make decisions about. You don't need to do what the regional district has done. There are other choices you can make. So first there's a preamble and a purpose. But one of the first questions you'll have to answer is who does the code apply to? Like, what's the scope of the code? And in the regional district, it includes the board, committees, and commission members, which I assume includes non-elected members. Probably have commissions at the regional district that are non-elected members. So what are your first questions? And we're not going to discuss this now. We'll come to it. But one of your first questions will be, what's the scope? And there are communities across BC that have just council. The only people that the code applies to is council, and the only people that can make complaints are council members. That the regional district one is a little broader than that. And so it applies to more people, and more people can make complaints. I will say that there has been discussion, and there have been communities that have included the public as can we, make complaints, and a number of communities have more recently drawn that back because it has become so burdensome. So, but that's a possibility out there. And then when does it apply? Does it apply just at constituted, meetings, or does it apply more broadly? And so you can see there that the Catholic code of conduct has a very broad scope. So again, another decision point for you. And then in the second paragraph, only members of boards, committees, and commissions can file complaints. So any questions about that? This is a key decision point for you. Okay. And I'll just say the experience of other communities that I've worked with, I think that they have found that starting small is, and maybe you expand it over time, but maybe starting small is the right place. And then you have, again, as I mentioned, the foundational principles of responsible conduct. These 4 also in your oath of office, page 2, and at the top of page 3, requirement to comply with the law. And I'll just say that because I was party to some discussions about this, this is only recently been put in writing as in the oath. It was in addition to the last oath of office before the last election, because before that nobody thought that we actually had to say it, but now we have to say it. Mm-hmm. So you take an oath that you will behave consistent with the law and uphold the law. And then again, conduct of members, the foundational principles of responsible conduct are repeated on page 3 and 4. At the bottom of page 4, respect for the office, respect for the process. So here, the board's meeting procedure bylaw is noted here. So I think that I haven't seen this in every code of conduct that I've looked at, but I think this is really probably worth doing. Here's my editorial comment. But you have a meeting procedure bylaw, which we're going to talk about tomorrow, and it lays out the rules of the road for you, how you conduct your meetings. So I think it makes sense to link it to your code of conduct. On page 5, conduct of public meetings. So again, lays out some expectations for how you'll prepare and how you'll behave at a public meeting. Number 5, that your decisions will be based on merit. So on the facts that are presented to you. You're committed to transparency and information sharing. So you know the default for local governments in BC that all your meetings will be held in open unless they meet a certain set of requirements.
I actually had a question of clarity
Sure.
about this one. So any substantive information which they may have received from sources outside the public decision-making process, if that information is relevant to a matter that is under consideration. So I didn't understand the scale or the specificity of that. So I know, for example, going into public hearings, it's, we can't get any more information. We make sure that we share information beforehand, but I feel like there's so many things that go into each of our individuals' decision-making. And I don't know what the level threshold of it being germane to everyone might be. I didn't understand, I don't know how to interpret this, I guess, is what I'm saying.
I think the intent of this, maybe Councillor Doak will recall the discussions, but I think the intent of this is that you will share substantive information with your fellow decision makers. I think
So
that
the substantive, I guess, is maybe the question that I have.
Yeah.
What substantive
of
is?
any significance in the decision making. And I think what this is trying to deal with is a couple of things. One is that sometimes elected officials harbor information, they keep it to themselves, and then they might use it in a gotcha moment. I think it's really to try to deal with that you will respect the interests of a good decision-making process, which really demands sharing of anything that's of any significance.
Thank you.
I haven't seen this in a code of conduct before, that particular one before. Do you recall anything?
Like you're right on.
Oh, that's almost reassuring.
Somebody that is party to some significant
Yeah.
information that would make a difference. They're the only one. Sure, so that everybody has the same information.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not, that's all it is. It's a good faith willingness to share whatever real information you have. Not that you heard somebody talking about it in the line at the grocery store. It's something you know about.
Yeah.
It's a fact.
So information is power.
Okay.
Right. Number 7, confidential information. Of course, the community charter imposes upon you a responsibility to keep confidential information confidential. It's a disqualified. This is one of the things in the charter. One of the few things that will expose you to disqualification. So it's a serious matter. It's repeated here. Number 8, use of public resources. So a commitment to just use public resources for public purposes, not for your own gain. Number 9, communications of social media. Now this makes reference to the regional district social media policy. I don't know, does City of River have a social media policy? No. So you might, at some point, you might create a social media policy, or you might put some things here if you wanted to have a social media section. And you might want to include some things here. And this section 9.3, this is, I commonly see this in codes of conduct. So it's about, taking responsibility for what you put on social media, but also for your own social media sites, that you have a responsibility to monitor them. So you might want to consider something along those lines. And then section 10, again, acknowledging that the mayor in this case is the primary spokesperson. and that he alone is responsible for speaking on behalf of the municipality. They also have, again, references to other policies that are regional district policies. And then in 10.2, and I always think this is a really important clause, or something like this, that when speaking for themselves as individuals, board members will include, in my opinion, or use a similar disclaimer to ensure that they're expressing clearly they are speaking only for themselves and not on behalf of either the regional district or the board as a whole. So I think there's a lot of anxiety around feeling muzzled. So you just have to be, if you don't want your members to feel that way, then to provide a way for them to express their opinion. Say, this is not how council voted. Council voted to take this direction. I didn't vote in that way, but we've made a decision we're moving on. They didn't share my opinion. You know, I think elected officials need to be able to say that.
One question about this. It's so that makes sense, obviously, for the media and interactions with the public. Does this include, like, sometimes we might attend a community, sorry, I'm on section 10 as well. Specifically, I suppose, 10.1.
Yeah.
So if we're at a public gathering, and people are asking about council stuff, like I will talk about decisions that council has made. And so I guess I'm speaking on behalf of council, but in a more informal way.
Yeah.
And it's not that I would say in those interactions, like, I can't say only the mayor can speak to these issues, but this is more like, you know, when the mayor, for example, is in the press, or other, you know, large stages, I guess.
I think just I do this is I think you should feel free to communicate the will of council, the decisions of council. Just the one caveat is you want to make sure they're accurate, right?
Yeah.
You want to be confident, and if you're not confident, you know, you should be saying, but you know, I can't remember. I'm not certain what council decided on that. Let me check, and I'll get back to you. So it's just about accuracy, I think, is the worry.
I think the key point there is if people are going to speak on behalf of council, and that's to be on behalf of a decision that council has made.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not something that somebody may have said at the council table.
Yeah.
That's not part of a motion, not part of a decision.
Yeah.
The council actually made.
Yeah.
That's I think where the risk comes in. Councilors saying the council thinks this, when it turns out that the council hasn't made a decision on it.
Yeah. Lisa, do you have any comments on that? On council's, you know, recognizing that the mayor is the spokesperson for the council, but in informal settings, relaying the decisions of council to somebody who asks.
I think that it has been done. And I think as long as it's,
Accurate.
yes, as long as it's accurate, that's, otherwise it's very hard for the community because they see all of our council members, particularly in a small community, we invite them to speak on things. And if they weren't able to, it would frustrate the community and frustrate them. That's the relationships there.
Yeah, I feel the same way. So I think you just have to make sure that you're not presenting yourself as a spokesperson, you know? Yeah, that's possible.
So that's a very good question. In terms of conduct, when you're in public, the first thing on your mind should be, I'm only speaking on behalf of myself, not for council, you as an individual. And secondly, if you're referring to issues at the council table, you really can't present any factual information until a resolution is adopted at the council meeting, not the committee of the whole or any other venue, because that's the only thing that applies in the end. So I just wanted to make that distinction.
Yeah, well, I think if it's a committee of the whole meeting, I'm assuming your committee of the whole meeting is making recommendations to council. You could say, you know, council made a recommendation to council, it's going to be considered at the next council meeting.
Yes.
You know, that would be.
In that regard,
Yeah.
yes. Perfect.
Yeah, and then you can have a personal opinion about it as well. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Excuse me, I believe Councillor Elliott
Oh,
has.
sorry.
Thank you. So when, our official spokesperson is out in the community and speaking on behalf of council, if the things that are being said are not a council decision and there's, maybe indecision around how the will of council is on that topic, is there something we should be doing about that? What's the thing to do if council is not really feeling the will of council is being spoken about by our spokesperson?
So I think there's two parts to that question. First part is, if council hasn't made a decision about something, you're still figuring it out along the way, then the mayor should express that, probably. You know, council's still in the process of making a decision, and, you know, we'll revisit this at a meeting 3 weeks from now, something like that. If, and I don't mean to pick on you, Mr. Mayor. Well, just like a theoretical mayor. If, let's say council makes a decision and a theoretical mayor reports they've made a different decision, like says in public, or says something negative about the decision of council, then I would say that would be grounds for a complaint. Now, just following up on your earlier comment, you know, one would hope that if that occurs, I mean, it might have been innocent, and you would go and talk to the mayor and say, I think you misrepresented the decision of council, or you misrepresented where council's at in this decision-making process. And you would hope that the mayor would then say, oh, okay, yeah, you're right, and make whatever amends are necessary. If the mayor was, you know, determined not to represent the will of council, then it's grounds for complaint.
Yeah, I don't like the whole idea of making complaints, and I'm just wondering if there's more collaborative ways to, like maybe we have regular check-ins where we can talk about things a little bit.
Talk to the mayor.
Yeah, you can go talk to the mayor too.
You know, that's, I think, what you're getting at.
Well, and I do. If I'm worried, I tell him.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, that's what you would hope that people would do. Is if you would find easy resolution to, you know, disagreements. That's what you hope.
Yeah.
I would hope that you would only, for those, use complaints for intractable problems.
Yeah.
So, you know, there are renegade mayors in British Columbia who are not, they're either in the majority around a council table or they're misrepresenting the will of council, and they're going to be subject to complaints. And just one, because what alternative do you have if they don't?
Well, the gray areas, of course, where the will of council is not known.
Well, then the mayor should be saying the will of council is not known. Right? Council hasn't made a determination on this. That's the reality. That's what should be represented.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Overton, neighbor.
Well, I was thinking, I think where some things will like never come in front of council. They're not necessarily council decisions. They're just like topics in the community. And I feel like as a councillor, I have almost more flexibility than the mayor does because I'm not the official spokesperson, and I can say, you know, in my opinion, or I can just talk about whatever's going on. The mayor has a special role as spokesperson, and so people might infer something given his role. And so I'm wondering what the additional pressures on the mayor might be and how to handle those or how to speak to that kind of stuff.
I think you're absolutely right, and that was exactly my feeling when I became mayor, because I thought, oh, I'm confined now. I used to be able to just speak my mind. Now I have this additional ability. And I found it a bit unnerving, to be honest. I don't know, Mr. Mayor, if you do, but
I find your words what I practice. If I cannot comment, I just say I cannot comment.
Yeah.
Very simple.
Yeah. But I do think that is an extra burden for the spokesperson, because you're right, no matter what the mayor says, people will infer that it is somehow representing council. So they're confined to it.
I think that it goes down to everybody in a maybe a less solid way.
Yeah.
If a counselor goes out and says, this is what I think should happen.
Yeah.
And doesn't say, it's my opinion to be decided later by council, but I think that.
Yeah.
You don't add all those words in. If you just say, I think the right thing to do should be this. There are people in the room will say, well, Councillor Dowd said that. He's probably gonna get that passed in council. That,
Yeah.
you know, that has more weight.
Yeah.
Than the guy from across the street saying he thinks that should happen in council because he doesn't have a vote and opposite thing. People read things into what people say because of their office, much more into what the mayor says than what I say. But they still listen to what I say, and if I'm not clear that it's my own opinion and not council's opinion, next thing you know, Councillor Southcott will be getting his call saying, how come you agreed with Councillor Doug that idea?
And on that note,
That happens.
Councillor Southcott did have a question and then followed by Councillor Pine.
Actually, partly an observation, and that is that people are very seldom interested in what we decided more than a day or two after we decided it. The real interest in is what we haven't decided or haven't done quite yet or is in process. So by nature of that, over the years I've practiced really focusing on that it is process that I'm commenting on. I also, at the bottom of my email, have a disclaimer saying that I'm just speaking for myself, not for mayor or council. It's like 2 lines to make it really, really clear. So people are reminded of that constantly, that it's really just a piece when they hear from any of us. And all of us are very involved in all sorts of different ways in this country, in this community. There are ratepayers. There's 4 distinct neighborhoods here, and there are organizations representing most of them. That's one way, but there are many organizations that many of us are involved in, and so often we get asked political questions, and people will apologize first. Oh, I'm sorry, but ask you, but then they just launch into it. So we're having these conversations constantly, and to frame it in terms that it is process, so people don't get the idea there's been decisions made. I found that very easy to, stay tuned, keep watching. They're right, here they are right here.
Yeah.
There's 6 of them in the gallery right now, and who knows how many on TV. They're watching us all the time, and so much more now than in past years. So that's really good, but we really we're communicators. That's a huge part of this job. So this is big time important.
Yeah.
I'm glad to see it, and I really appreciate all the work that the RV did.
Councillor Southcott's comments about small town and how much information goes out in the ether one way or another from whoever in this building or elsewhere. So with that being the case and people talking and watching and everything else, I want to get your opinion on social media. I want to go back to social media for a minute. Because when we're dealing with social media and you're speaking on, and a certain councillor or any councillor for that matter doesn't put a disclaimer on maybe their own name, but puts city councillor underneath a name and then goes on and says a few things on social media. I want to get your opinion on maybe that's not the best thing to do, because the only thing I keep hearing after years and years of training and council orientation is don't use social media. Don't go on social media. Speaking as a member of this table. So I'd like your comments in that regard.
Well, I think you might want to establish a policy around social media. So you have some guidelines to follow. I think in this day and age, it's probably unrealistic to think that people just won't be on social media. So, and I think that's probably where that ended up too, where 9.3 lays out some guidelines for how to deal with social media. I think everybody's going to make their own choice about their comfort level the social media.
But when you go on, the key question is, you make sure that, as Councillor Southcott has pointed out, you're putting your disclaimer out there, you're speaking for yourself.
Yeah.
That's a very pertinent point.
Yeah.
Correct?
Well, it's like any kind of communication. Again, just, I mean, whether it's on social media or it's in the Tim Hortons lineup or, you know, at a council meeting, you want to make sure what you're communicating is accurate. And if you don't know, be able to say no. And to make sure that you're representing just yourself. And except for the mayor. So section 11, it's conflict of interest, actually just, you know, defaults to the community charter. And then gets in favors the same way, defaults to the community charter, what the legislation says about that.
I think I don't think this is particularly addressed here, but I think one of the issues that has come up from time to time at this council table, and maybe speaking to past council tables as well, is there may be some council members that are concerned that a different councillor has a conflict of interest, but it's up to that councillor to declare that conflict of interest. And so if people have a concern, what they should do or how they should address this, and or whether, again, default to the community charter.
So the responsibility to declare conflict of interest is, as you say, on the individual. Nobody else can determine it. No, the individual needs to determine it. But there are occasions when the council might consider that there's that the individuals, what they perceive to be a conflict of an individual, puts the corporation at risk. So let me give an example of that. So let's say you are voting on a land use bylaw and you've gone through a long process, you've had public engagement, it's a big project in town, and somebody or a member of council is thought to have a conflict of interest. Say he owns shares in the company that's proposed the development, right? So council's going to come and vote on this bylaw. If the councillor who has owned shares in this company doesn't declare conflict of interest, it jeopardizes the bylaw. So you could, for example, pass the bylaw, and then there could be somebody who would take the councillor to court and to have the courts determine if there was a conflict of interest. So this happened while I was in council with the District of North Saanich. Council member was taken by electors to court and was found to be in conflict and was disqualified. But the rest of council has an interest in this because you could have a bylaw that ends up being defeated, right? So you want to deal with that in advance. And I think the solution for that is for the rest of council to get legal opinion and then try to persuade the council that he is.
Just, I circulated around, and sorry, I didn't circulate it to you, but
I think I saw it.
we saw the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court's been pretty definitive in that the appearance of conflict can be the same as a conflict in terms of mediating or looking at the end result. And so I think we need to consider that, because the appearance of conflict doesn't necessarily come from yourself. But if somebody's sitting there and observing, then it's logical that the public is sitting there observing it.
Yeah. So just, we don't probably want to get into the details of this, but you circulated the Young Anderson opinion, which was excellent, I thought. So just, you know, this is a whole discussion in and of itself, but what action can you take if the council feels that there's risk to the corporation as a whole? Then you seek. I think that's the way to do it.
You know, I like what your answer to that was. The council, because if we're a majority thinks that there may be a conflict of interest, they can ask for a legal opinion.
Right.
I've been in a courtroom where a lawyer tried to put a legal opinion forward. The judge said, don't give me that. The only opinion that matters in this one is mine. So, legal opinions are nice and indicative, give you an idea, but they're not the end of the world. Council requesting one is way better than everybody opening up Canada law books and trying to find a precedent that things they back them up. But, the other way is that if you have a code of conduct, you can make a complaint under the conflict of interest section.
Right.
Somebody is violating the code of conduct.
Right.
You can't do that if you don't have a code of conduct.
Yeah, and that's raises a very interesting point, because I just recently had a client who has chosen not to include these provisions, the gifts provisions and the conflict of interest provisions in the code of conduct. They chose not to do that. So to leave it to the court processes. So that's a decision that you have to make, whether you include them or not.
So I've actually had declared conflict where I thought there could be an appearance. For example, I declare conflict when things involve our local curling club. I'm a member of the curling club. The company I belong to sponsors the curling club. I'm not on the board. I'm not, in control of anything. I don't personally benefit from the curling club. They take my money. But I declare anyway, because, the company that belongs to me has a huge sign on the wall, and it might not, look good, so forth. But I'd had the corporate officer argue the opposite. You're pulling yourself out of the decision making, and if there is no actual conflict, you're reneging on your duties. And so we need to be cautious around declaring conflict for an appearance also. At least that's what my corporate officer of the day was explaining to me, that, you could be taken to task for that as well. And there's precedents for that. So each person does decide. Some are more cautious than others. Other counselors of the day, when I was doing that, were kind of frustrated because, well, I'm also a member of that club and I'm not declaring conflict. And I'm like, well, it's not just the membership part of it, it's the sponsorship that I'm feeling puts it in a different realm. And so they seem to be mad at, I felt annoyance from people because it seemed like I was setting a bar higher than they thought I should. And so is there risk on that side as well?
Well, there's probably not a lot of risk on that side unless a decision would fall because of the absence of one member, right? Then you're in a real pickle, right? So let's say that you have a deciding vote, right? Then you might really have to reflect on whether you want to take.
So it only matters when things are close on either side. Okay.
So section 13, policy rule members, in the case of the regional district, they adhere to the board chief administrative officer one, or if you have a policy to that effect in Bell River, but you might want to consider that. I mean, it's interesting that it's in here. Sometimes municipalities have a specific policy that say we respect and adhere to the board chief administrative officer model of local governments. And then it lays out how you interact with the staff. So they indicate in 13.2 all questions, issues go to the CAO. And then they're funneled through to the managers. To the CAO and the manager of the appropriate department. Refrain from contacting any other staff directly. So they lay that out. It's very clear. So whatever the norm is in Powell River, you might consider including that in your code of conduct. Interesting clause about not engage in debate with the staff. And importantly, not interfere with the administrative or operational functions. There's actually a clause in the community charter that references this. It's not the community charter is referenced here, but this is drawn from the community charter. And then there's 14 is about positive workplace. And again, if you have safe workplace bylaw, you might want to draw some wording from that to put in this space or not include it at all. Again, entirely up to council. And then there's the breaches complaint handling and disciplinary action. And I'll just highlight some of the decision points that you're going to have to make. Where did it, so in 15.2, how do you make a complaint? And this actually doesn't detail, submitted in writing. Often the code will say these are the things that need to be included in the complaint. They're not detailed here that I can see, but anyway, so, and then to the board chair and the CAO. Now, this can take any number of different forms. Again, this is a decision point of view. Does it go to the CAO? Does it go to the chair and the CAO? Does it go to a third party? How do you, who do you send the complaint to? And then this requires that a copy be sent to the respondent, so the person you're complaining about. But it could also be that you just submit the complaint and then whoever's handling the chair, the CAO, or a third party would then communicate the nature of the complaint to the respondent. And then it has to happen within 6 months. So how long do you give somebody to make a complaint? Do you give them 6 months? Do you give them a year? 6 months here with an extension of 6 months if the circumstances require. And then 15.3 is a prohibition of complaints during the nomination period. This seems to be quite a common clause now. So do you put a moratorium on complaints during the political season? 15.4, if you, they have to vote the chair, but in the case where the chair is the source of the complaint, then the complaint is delivered to the vice chair. And I'll tell you, this is actually a really important clause, because I was involved with one recently, and there was no provision like this, and they didn't know who to send the complaint to. So important to have some of these alternatives. 15.5, again, we were just talking about this earlier, make every effort to resolve it informally before you do anything else. Yes.
Comment on that is that this is great, having a resolution between the respondent and the complainant. Great. If nobody's feeling vulnerable or threatened, or there's a power imbalance there. It's, this isn't happening in the course of a normal chat on a nice, happy, carefree day. Yeah. This is happening in the framework that somebody's complaining about somebody else's action, and they might not both be happy about sitting down together and having a friendly chat, because that might not be the atmosphere. So, the mutual discussion and resolving the complaint between themselves, can be a really good idea. But this is in the context of a complaint where there is a problem. You have to be considerate of people's safety.
Yeah, you hope that if a complaint is being made, that it's probably not a real problem. It's not. Things are already rough if it's gotten to this point. And then 15.6 is if a formal resolution not achieved in 30 days of receipt of the complaint, then it moves to a qualified mediator. And then if the 15.7, if the complaint, if it's mediated, then fine. Then they can close the matter. And 15.8, if not within 60 days, then the complaints were referred to the board chair, and then you go in 15.9 to a third party investigator. And then the 15.10, there's a preliminary assessment done. And if it's not determined to be frivolous, are vexatious or outside the scope of the code, then they go forward with the investigation. And if, 15.11 determines to continue the investigation and then the steps of the investigation and some timelines. 15.12, the investigator may fall the determined to dismiss the complaint. So we've given the authority to the investigator to dismiss the complaint if they find it to be vexatious or frivolous. 15.13, they're provided a report or a summary of the report to the board, who must, after hearing the submissions of the respondent, which may decide on the appropriate remedy, if any. And then 15.14 are the things that you would want to consider when deliberating on the enforcement provisions. So a list of
1511, the
oh yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I missed that. 15.11D lays out the options you have, or likely options that you would take in the case of a complaint. A letter reprimanding the respondent, public censure, requiring an apology, removal from committee commission membership, recommended the respondent receive training, counseling, or coaching, volunteer hours, prohibition from representing the district at events and or attending conferences or seminars at the regional district's expense, recommendation that respondent make a charitable donation, limiting the access of the respondent to staff, and any other sanction that's within your authority. But laying these out in advance, again, this is about administrative fairness. Everybody knows that if they breach this code of conduct, these are the possible sanctions. Yeah.
So 1512 is kind of important, and it had a lot of conversation at the regional district when we came up with it. And it's if the investigator finds that it was filed vexatiously or frivolously, that penalties can be and enforcement can be launched against the person who made the complaint.
Sorry, say that again.
1512.
Yes, 1512.
If the investigator finds that the complainant was doing so frivolously or vexatiously, they can make recommendations for remedies, including penalties, under this code as well.
So 1512 says, may also determine to dismiss the complaint and further define it has been filed vexatiously or such a finding shall constitute a breach of this policy on the part of the complaint.
And those remedies are listed out.
Oh, I see. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. So then there can be
remedies the other way.
Yes, I'm sorry. I just took me a minute to soak that in. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if that's standard.
Frivolous.
Yeah, so I don't know if that's standard or not, but it had a lot of conversation at the regional, and it's to dissuade people from just launching complaints willy-nilly.
Yeah, you know what?
Maybe that town that had just 19 outstanding complaints needs that clause. I don't know.
I just can't speak to whether I've seen it elsewhere or not. I'm just not sure. I know the last couple that I've looked at, I haven't seen that, but it's not to say it's not a good thing. It's really saying, like, don't trifle with this. Right? Yeah, use this for serious matters. Because you can just see, when this forging the path to responsible conduct, one of the real concerns was that these codes of conduct would be weaponized, right? That people would use them as weapons. And I think we've seen them. And so, it's really unfortunate. It's costly. Does a lot of cultural damage to the organization and probably some harm on the individuals. So I think you want to really think about the complaints before you launch. Is there anything else here that the rest of it is pretty straightforward? And there's a requirement for all of the members to sign the contract, so to actually, you know, agree. It's not, this isn't a majority opinion, everybody has to sign it. So my thinking was that we would go through the list of questions that's on this agenda and have a discussion about each of these things and try to make some decisions about where you'd like to fall on the spectrum of codes of conduct and some of the details. And then, at least I think the thinking was that the draft would be brought back to you, we can clean it up again. Because I think, you know, you probably want to spend some time thinking about these things. And so it's come a draft will come back and you probably have another discussion about the details, what you would want to endorse and what you would endorse. So does that sound like a plan?
Yep.
Maybe go until 1:30 or so and maybe take a little break.
2:30.
Or 2:30. 2:30 and take a break.
We're past 1:30 already. It makes no sense. Yeah.
You have to have a retroactive break.
It's like, and we break.
So if we could just go to those questions for council consideration, we'll just work through these one by one, and then if there's anything else at the end that we haven't covered that you want to discuss, then we'll take business up too. So first of all, you know, who does the code apply to? Only council members, council members and your committee members, the public.
I'll start by saying council and committee.
Do your committees include non-elected people?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And any other thoughts on that?
I would agree with the mayor that, you know, people on committees will be interacting with council on a regular basis. That's where, you know, if conflict could arise there, and I think, you know, try to deal with any conflicts with the public would be quite a massive situation. And so to me, having council and any committee members, commission members, that's interacting with council directly makes sense.
Yeah.
As far as staff members go, I don't think the staff members should be involved in that because there is a totally separate chain of events for employment law that really apply to all staff members. So that leaves, in my mind, council members and people who are on committees.
Do you have commission? Do you have any commissions?
We don't have commissions, we just have commissions and a select committee as well.
So my thoughts are that it would be great to have a code of conduct that applies to committees too, but I'm curious about the remedies that and how you would apply them to non-council members. And what does that mean? Everybody who joins a committee must sign the code of conduct. And if there's remedies for training and so forth for committee members that were from the public, how would you even implement that? So I think we need to have good conduct on our committees and we need people to be aware of the code of conduct. But I think it's the council members on those committees that really need to adhere to the code of conduct because all of the remedies are designed with council members in mind or elected officials in mind, and they don't really fit the non-elected peoples. And I feel like we would be not able to enforce any of it there.
Yeah, I think the remedy for your committee members is dismissal of the committee. You have the ultimate authority. You get rid of them. I think what this provides is for the committee members to make complaints. And I think just on the committees, if you don't have some guidelines for committees about, and you have terms of reference, I'm assuming, and some kind of expectations around them, you might kind of help them.
I just want to observe that the City of Nanaimo's code of conduct does include committee members, and so and it applies very not just on a complaint basis, it applies to their conduct as well. So,
But the remedies don't apply. The remedy is to dismiss them, or just give them a warning, or
And maybe,
however you want to handle it.
and maybe it just is making sure those remedies are clear in our remedies list, or maybe they already are.
Mhm.
Mr. Meredith.
Yeah, I think because committees result from a motion or a bylaw, and then there's a selection process, and council invites these selected ones to be on it, that it would make sense to me to have them sign the code of conduct. Because from a public's perspective, the council is responsible, having set it up and selected these people.
Yeah, I think, there still probably needs to be guidelines for committee,
Mhm.
their behavior that's maybe separate from. I don't know, I really have to think this through. I think the reason committees are included in some codes of conduct, again, maybe you can give some history, but I think it's so they can offer a complaint. Much more than controlling their behavior, it's about their ability to make a complaint.
Councillor Southcott and Councillor Isaacs.
Small point. I don't recall any terms of reference for any committee we've had over the past few years that hasn't included the requirement for the committees to comply with our procedure bylaw. And I believe within our procedure bylaw, there's some mention of conduct. I don't remember clearly. Do you remember? So if by extension, I would kind of be surprised if we didn't, simply as a matter of expectation, include this as well.
So that's maybe a bit of a question. Or Councillor Isaac.
Yeah, like I think I agree with the mayor in the sense that, yeah, committees are appointed by council. We want their conduct to meet certain criteria, and also the ability for complaints to be made if there's a, for example, if there was a troublesome committee member, then what is the question? What recourse and who does a fellow council member go to if there's an issue, and what resolve do they have? Or how do they deal with it? So I think the code of conduct, right as it exists right now, is really written to council members. And so I also, share Councillor Elliott's concerns that, like, for example, yeah, there's just some things about like public interactions and some of the laws that apply to us are just a little bit different for committee members. So there maybe are just specific clauses that are relevant to committees. I'm not sure, but something's needed. I agree.
And maybe application of who does it apply to and who can complain are two separate things.
Councillor Doug.
I really don't see any need other than to include in the committee's terms of reference that they're required to sign the code of conduct. And there will be things that are totally irrelevant in the code of conduct by themselves. If they're, if they're not receiving pay, obviously there's no ability to stop them from being paid. If they're, if they're not, as far as the remedies and things like that, and as far as the social media and speaking on behalf of council, all that actually all makes sense, that because somebody's been appointed to a committee, that they should control what they say about council's opinion when they're talking about on their social media, things like that. It applies just with some logic, and obviously there will be things that are irrelevant in the code of conduct because a committee member might not be affected by any of those things. So I think in the operation of it, it doesn't have to be different for committee members. They have the opportunity to be treated with respect and to treat others with respect. So that, means they have to be able to complain, and they have to be able to be subject to complaints.
I guess I wonder if you know, let me put this out there that, if you just have, that only applies to council members and only council members can complain. Just very limited scope. And then you have, you know, a separate code of conduct for.
I was just going to remind you that the draft terms of, or the terms of reference for the Harbor Committee does include a section on the code of conduct. It's fairly short, but I'm just going to let Alison close it.
Committee members are expected to conduct meetings with these terms of reference, virtually honest, not speak on behalf. So yeah, I just wonder if so those are terms of reference for your committees.
It's for one committee, and I haven't checked the other ones. The select committee probably has similar language, but we can double check. This is the more recently evolving and forming committee. So Council saw this, the draft it on December 7th, and adopted the terms of reference.
Yeah, so then the sort of suggestion, the option, one option you have is to separate council and committee. Deal with committee and their behavior in your terms of reference, and council separately. If you want committees to be able to complain, then you need to have them in this, what I assume will be a bylaw.
Yeah, I think Councillor Doe summarized it very nicely in that committee members are expected to understand the bylaws and the things that, you know, everybody adheres to. And if there's things there that don't mean anything to them, then it's it. But having a single document, I think, is important.
Well, you're still going to have a term of reference anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah, you still. Okay, so at the moment, what I think I hear you saying is you would include both council members and committee members in your code of conduct. Okay. Who can complain? Again, so both council and committee members. Not staff, not public.
A question about that. I agree with not including the public. I think that could be very costly. I'm wondering what recourse staff have, if there's existing procedures, if staff have a concern with a council or conduct, is it addressed in other avenues?
Well, I guess there's potentially something to work CPC. The code of conduct would allow council to police itself on the complaints. So there are some benefits to that, if that's how currently I think that draft.
That one allows staff to
It's
complain.
boards, committees, and staff.
Yeah, so it does allow that, and I believe the city of the Nine, just checking, I think that does as well. So that allows for a wider range of pieces that may spill into the staff council arena.
We have a one employer policy, which is our CAO. To me, it would be logical if any staff has any issue, they go to the CAO. He decides, she can then bring it to the council.
Through the chair should, just thinking about the situation where a staff person doesn't agree with the CAO about some issue with
CAO, go to the CAO.
and you, I'm just thinking this out loud.
Yeah.
Like, but they feel very strongly the CEO is blocking up the bill, bringing a valid complaint to council. Then I do think there should be a mechanism there that doesn't allow for frivolous bypassing the CEO. But if they tried and that hasn't worked, I'm just sort of thinking about that from a, you know, like if the CEO is a very doing something unethical and not allowing that to proceed.
Yeah. I have seen clauses.
We'll just get a new CAO.
Okay, there we go.
They're easy to find.
Would HR have a role in that then?
If I could just say, I have seen codes of conduct say if the complaint, if the CAO is not providing for access for the complaint to council, that they can go to the mayor.
Yeah, and I personally think that's a good thing. Anyway, that's for council to consider.
So I think that's an option for you.
Councillor Hope.
I think we have to be really, really careful if we're gonna start giving council a human resources role. We have an employee, CAO. CAO is the employer of all of the other employees on the city staff. There are collective agreements and employment contracts. If there's a dispute about those, CAO is the person who resolves it. And if you put in a safety valve there and you say, if you're unhappy with your employment with the city and you're unhappy with the result that you get when you're talking to the employer, if you're CAO, you can come into the political arena and have a political decision about your employment status. And I think that's dangerous.
But don't remember, this is a code of conduct. So it would have to be, say there is a harassment issue. So a member of council is harassing, maybe sexually harassing a staff member. And the staff member takes the concerns to the CAO and the CAO says, I'm not taking it to council.
So it's specific to the relationship between the staff person
And council.
not a regular HR.
Yeah.
So as it stands right now, there is a process within your staff to go through HR for things like that. Is that not correct?
There is, but the challenge is
Because
that serves very clear very well, but it doesn't involve the political arena. So this is in situations where the political arena comes into the staff. I'll give an example of one case I know where there was a harassment issue where the CEO had to actually have locked down things. One council member through the different wasn't given a key card, so that person was not constantly approaching council because it's supposed to see enforcement.
So my point, I guess, was around as soon as someone feels blocked, that's a secondary complaint. The complaint is then with the CAO because they couldn't resolve their initial complaint. And so that in itself is a different complaint, basically. And that would be internally dealt with through HR because we're not HR people. The getting resolution on the complaint about maybe a council member should definitely be addressed with the CAO with blessing. And if that's not happening, that's a different issue.
But there's no avenue.
That's right.
But if there was, for example, an avenue of the CAO theoretically sexually harassing a staff member.
But that's a different, that's an important definition.
It is.
A council's not.
Yeah, I know. But the ability for the staff member to get through to resolution and make a complaint if they're being blocked is an internal issue. It's secondary to the complaint. Maybe I'm doing legal mindedness, but the point I'm trying to get at is your problem of the CAO blocking is a secondary problem and needs to be addressed in the internal way. I know, yeah.
But I actually just seek some guidance for our own council about the cutoff between WCB issues with a complaint by a councillor towards the staff, sorry, vice versa, and the role a code of conduct may or may not play supporting staff person who the CEO may just dismiss. So,
Yeah, I think it does require.
if I take that away, so you can continue.
Thank you.
Well, I also wanted to add the draft or the regional district talks about a complaint being submitted simultaneously to the chair and the CAO. And so the CAO in this case can't block, the mayor receives it. So it gets to.
Yeah.
That's yeah. Okay, so that's stay tuned on that one. Will council members be expected to sign a commitment to the code of conduct? It's like an easy one. Okay.
We like that.
Yes.
maybe we'll just tackle this next set. Scope, will the code of conduct include the statutory topics, the conflict of interest, confidential information, and gifts? Yeah, Councillor.
I was gonna say yes, it's nice to have the reminder. I know that sometimes legislation changes, so maybe referencing it, but like sometimes the elements of it or the gist of it is helpful as a reminder, because I can't rely on my memory of Community Charter Clause 67, or I mean, I'm making that up.
You don't read it.
Section 90 is about the only one I hear about regularly. So I think it's helpful to have the reminder with the basics in it, and referencing. So that would be my preference to reference in it.
Others?
Yeah, I'm not opposed to any of that. We didn't really hit on section 12 when we reviewed it, which was the one that referenced gifts. And my only, I guess, question to that is, a lot of these gifts are of a, that have at least been referenced here, have a kind of distinct quality, for lack of a better word, to them. I'm going to make reference to an event. If there's an event happening in town, and the organizer of that event would like all the members of council to come, they could send tickets to that event to City Hall. And if they're all labeled individually, that mail would get placed into our individual mailboxes. Now, that's gone to all 7 members of council. Is that still considered a gift or not? And the flip side of that is, what if that same organization, instead of sending tickets out, sent an individual letter with an invitation to attend such event? Same end result, different purpose. Is the invitation versus a gift of a physical ticket considered one and the same for a community event that is for sale for everyone?
I think the trick is that it needs to be disclosed. In the event the gift is described 12.1 or received, a member must, per section 106, disclose them, right?
The value.
Gifts or gifts of the commercial enterprise as having a value that exceeds amounts for everyone. So I actually think that that's covered, to be honest.
Yeah, I'll just say in my time, which is substantial here, we've received numerous tickets over the years, and those have been utilized. For example, even things like our business get together at the Whitehall, the acting mayor usually gets a ticket along with the mayor. That's happened in the past, and there's been no issue. So anything of a minor value such as that has never been considered a problem.
Yeah, the other piece of 12.1 is it's from a business or a commercial enterprise. So if it's the local Kiwanis or the United Church or something, much less problematic.
Well, although I think we do make decisions based on community organizations, grant funding, housing agreements. Yes. And so I actually don't think it should be exclusive or specific to commercial enterprises.
Well, there is a value cap though.
Yeah.
So as long as you're under the value
cap,
you can participate on minor things. So I recently attended a local Leaders United as a presenter in a conference in Vancouver, and they wanted to give me an honorarium, and I declined. And it was because it was over the amount, and I didn't think I should be getting an honorarium for being a presenter about what I'm doing for my city. So that's the kind of example where you just don't do it.
Yeah.
But there are other gifts where protocol dictates that you do take them, because it would be rude not to. It's part of witnessing and exchange of gifts as part of the protocol in Indigenous ceremonies, for example. So those are the ones you want to accept and then disclose.
I know the charter. It's funny because it's not in here.
It just references
the charter does actually cover that.
Yeah.
Ceremonial job.
I think our main issue is that it might be that we want to include it reference to this clause, but the details of it we need to each understand, yeah.
The quality.
Yeah, yeah.
105 and 106 of the community charter that have a value that do not declare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's usually
Yeah.
well beyond the value of the ticket to a performance or something like that. Count. And the other one, 12.3, covers gifts that, you know, and maybe you may end up coming your way because you've attended something like the UPC or the ADJOURNMENT and the outdoor runs.
I want you to be able to see this.
It's 250, just for reference.
Yeah,
everyone.
that's.
Yeah,
that's
and it
our
can
policy
change.
already.
We would, yeah, if they change it, it hasn't changed, it's 250, but if it changes,
Is that our policy? Is that?
we don't, this doesn't make this out of date because it just references,
Part of the community charter.
yeah, it references whatever limits in the
Okay.
community charter.
And
Okay, so there's no question around that, and we'll just search that one out. I'm for sure that included a clause that said,
It's another clause.
okay, no convention, so just leave us with that and we'll just clarify that, because
you know, my position on this is these are, you know, our community charter is the law of the land, basically. The law of the land in these sections specifies for what's an appropriate, not an appropriate gift, then, you know, we're probably better off not to rethink that and try to change it up.
So I think, sorry, just to summarize this, I hear that you want to include these in the code of conduct, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I think this next question is going to be a little more complicated, so why don't we take a little break, we 10 minutes or so?
Yeah.
And then we'll come back and talk about the switch up. Can I come back at 2? Is that okay?
I think the protocol item is under section 105 2A.
Okay. And you will listen to summary.
It's only gonna be in 105 or 106, those are the only two. Is it your copy in this part of the law?
It's down the hall.
next question is, will the code include, specifics around conduct, for example, disrespectful behavior? This is a question I asked because it's in some other codes, but if I just take you to, page 3 and 2.2 respect, it lays out what the expectations for conduct are. So I guess my question is, do you need to say any more than that? Or do you want to say something like, that all behavior be respective as outlined in section 2.2 or something like that?
I feel like 2.2 lays it out fairly well. I think where it's kind of like the devil is in the details, like a situation happens where you don't feel something is quite right, but then it doesn't quite fit in these. But I feel like it's between this and also, I guess 1.2 as well. Kind of talks about it, but I think everyone has their slightly different interpretation on what, dignity, understanding, and respects looks like, and that's I think where we get into trouble. So
I expect that there was some discussion with legal when this is put together, and I think it captures it quite well.
So then the next step of informal resolution, and I don't believe you, but I take it from the earlier discussion that you would want to see some reference to informal resolution, that it would be the preferred path as a first step. And then maybe more specifically, are you comfortable with the 3-step process that the regional district one lays out?
I think it's a good process.
yeah.
So 3 steps.
I'm going in 2 different directions. One in the 3 steps. I think one thing that the Nanaimo Code of Conduct did that it references in the QRD one, but step 2 talks about mediator, but I almost feel like the mediator also mentions like culturally appropriate and transformative or restorative justice approaches. Like mediation is a very specific field with a public body attached, and I think there are perhaps other roles that both parties could agree to that meet the needs of this but aren't officially a mediator. And so I'm wondering if council would be willing, as long as it's kind of some sort of dispute resolution professional. I think that would be my one.
So instead of using mediator, using dispute resolution.
Professional.
I kind of like that. I think it goes to what I was trying to get at as well.
Okay.
Pardon me?
But
Instead of the word mediator, we use dispute resolution professional. And that could include processes that are not strictly mediation, but are designed to dispute resolution, such as healing circles or restorative justice, or things that are outside the definition of mediation.
Thanks.
You could also say qualified mediator or dispute resolution.
You start taking out one definition and putting in another specific definition. Then you have to look for somebody that advertises themselves as a dispute resolution professional. And the only reason I'm saying that is if you're in a situation where the people that are trying to come to a conclusion are in a combative situation, somebody might argue that, well, I'm not going to go to this person because they don't qualify for my dispute resolution professional because they have a different type.
Well, let's define it, I guess, then.
Mediator or something similar. I think what we want to do is get a third party in there that can somehow bring people together.
Yeah.
you know, what word do you want to use? But
So I think
you want to be
mediation,
more inclusive rather.
we'll use word and from my perspective, it's all inclusive. A good mediator will look at the two individuals and come up with his mind a process that would best fit.
So, do you want to take mediator out and have a broader term like this dispute resolution professional? Or do you want to keep qualified mediator and put forward?
There's two ways, I think, to address that. We could be broader and define the word dispute resolution to include mediation and recognized restorative justice. So basically, you're looking for qualified things, and we could define that to be broader, which was the intent of what we were why we brought this up. Was mediation is an actual profession that kind of confines you to a particular process. And if it would be more appropriate for some people to have a different process, then that kind of excludes them. And being inclusive of other recognized dispute resolution processes was the goal, then maybe we just define that to include all those things.
Okay.
Just thinking about different mutations of this, because another person, you know, I would be aware of who's a dispute resolution professional would be an arbitrator.
Mm-hmm.
Very different than a mediator.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Very different process. But the arbitrator now fits into dispute resolution specialist, or wouldn't fit in. She wouldn't fit into a mediator definition. Because they're not the same thing.
Isn't the end goal that the two parties in conflict mutually accept the person or group that would be that third party?
This doesn't require that, but you could add that.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, if we're looking at like, I can understand Councillor Elliott's point that a mediator being a qualified, an actual profession, the wording would limit it to only a mediator. But in the end, if the two parties are like, you know, Jim Bob down the road is a acceptable person to help us through this, then why can't they use Jim Bob to do that, right? So it's an acceptable
Third
party to mediate the situation.
I just note that in 15.8, it has wording, independent third party identified and agreed upon between the complainant and the respondent who has the necessary professional skills, knowledge, and experience to investigate the complaint. But we could take that wording and make that the wording to mediate the respondent with the complaint in the previous 15.6. Just mutually, who shall forward the complaint to an independent third party identified and agreed upon between the complainant and respondent to attempt to resolve the conflict.
Mhm. Can you point out specifically which clause that language comes from?
15.8.
15.8.
In reference to investigator is what.
Okay.
In this case, it's a reference to an investigator. But
Yeah.
I think the same language.
So like agreed upon and who has the necessary professional skill,
Right.
knowledge, and experience. I'm okay with that, Howard.
Yeah, I think the two fit nicely together in
Yeah.
15.7, 15.8.
Will we draft something along those lines?
Yeah, the intention being to be as broad as possible.
Or this one?
Yeah.
Is it funny that,
Yeah,
Oh,
she's just a,
but this is.
Yeah, she
but
knows.
it's not that that's consent for informal resolution, but not consented to the individual, right? Yeah, that's the difference. Okay,
I wanted to just raise, we didn't, when in going through your questions, we didn't touch on communications like social media and communications with the public and media. And I'm not sure if there's any questions that we should answer as a group on those sections.
Yeah, that to me.
Sure.
Just add it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, okay, so the formal resolution, yes, 3 steps, and we'll make the change to a dispute resolution professional taking word for 15.8. So complaint filing and investigation, so who receives the complaint? Does it go directly to the third party? Does it go to the mayor and the CAO? Does it go to the CAO? Who do you want the complaint to go to?
I like the both.
I like the mayor and the
Mayor and CAO,
And then in our case, would it be the acting mayor in lieu of
right?
the mayor? Rather than vice chair, we don't have the vice chair.
Yeah, we would have mayor and acting mayor standing in if it's needed. Or they have chair and acting chair, that's what we would put in.
And I think we've already addressed, if we adopt the wording, the regional district code, we've addressed the 3 steps, who will actually conduct the investigation.
Yeah.
And
Is
then,
there something in here if people can't come to agreement about who the investigator should be?
I
I'm just
think
trying to
what
remember.
happens is it will just go automatically, just do this again.
If the parties, 5.9 line 3, if the
Yeah.
parties cannot agree on the choice.
Oh, okay.
pretty complicated.
Yes,
Yeah.
15.
Mhm.
The district solicitor will appoint the person at the end of the day.
Mhm.
You know, that's sort of, I think.
Oh, okay, it comes down to our lawyer would appoint at the very last, okay,
Right.
gotcha.
Yeah, so at the very end.
You guys suck, here, we're gonna, the lawyer's gonna appoint someone, okay, gotcha.
So investigator powers and abilities, can the investigator dismiss complaints as vexatious or without merit? Want to give them,
I would say yes, but that's the way we protect this from being weaponized, right?
that's, yes. And will the code give broadcast powers to the investigator? I would say that the regional district one does, gives broad powers.
What would be an example of not having broad powers given to the
Maybe
investigator?
limiting the way they can investigate.
Mm.
Maybe not allowing them to dismiss complaints. Those are the 2 areas that I think you want to give them those powers, which is the regional district.
So in this context, the investigator investigates and they're a little bit like an arbitrator, right? They make recommendations and the board's or the council's responsible for the decisions that are made in arbitrator. In arbitration, they're not, so that's different. But as far as the kinds of remedies they can come up with and the ideas of what they think is justice, the broad powers you're talking about is there, right?
I think the investigation pieces that they can call witnesses.
Okay.
They can require people to meet with them, to investigate.
Okay, yeah.
So it's not about, arbitrating, it's about investigating.
Okay, thank you for that.
So timelines, section, we can just go through them. If they are starting at 10, I think. So first of all, the submission of a complaint, how the RD is 6 months, the potential extension for another 6 months. How long, what's the statute of limitations for complaints? How long do you want to allow?
So,
Why is that not?
Is that about to give a complaint 6 months?
So sorry.
well, I myself have it as 1 month. I mean, to me, a code of conduct is to resolve issues that are impacting the performance of an organization. And to let people think, oh, well, there's no rush here. Yeah, it's an issue, but I got up to 6 months. Well, during that 6 month period, if it is a real complaint, the organization is suffering. So if we're going to have this, let's have them take action.
I think in some cases, it's not necessarily the organization that's suffering, it's an individual person, and there's a lot of decisions that someone who feels that they are a victim in a situation might have to go through to get to the point of making a complaint. So I agree that 6 months might be generous, but I think 1 month is too short from my viewpoint. I do like the ability of the chair and CAO to provide an extension if they think the situation warrants it, but I think, like, situationally, I think I agree most things should come ahead quite soon, but there may be situations where someone who has suffered harm and they actually really have to grapple with things before they feel comfortable making a complaint.
So don't.
Requirement is 6 months deadline is a deadline. 6 months to complain. Doesn't say you can't complain half an hour after that an incident occurs, or a week or a month after. Probably the sooner the better. But I agree with what Councillor Isaacson is saying, is that sometimes it takes a little while for people to actually understand the impact of the situation and sort through what they need to do about it or what it's done to them, and get to the point where they're willing to make a complaint. So, I'm saying when we have a limit there of 6 months, it's not unreasonable to me, and it shouldn't be looked at as the minimum time to lodge a complaint. It's the maximum, because after 6 months, your opportunity is gone.
Mm-hmm.
Make that too short. Somebody just goes away on vacation, comes back from the vacation and realizes that they don't want to come into the building, then they can find the timeline is expired. They make it too short.
So there's also, because it was thought a good idea to make sure that people couldn't use this as a political tool during an election, there's a freeze time where complaints are not to be heard or launched within an election time. But that doesn't mean that you're not accountable for your behavior. You could launch a complaint after the election is over about something, and that time frame needs to allow for that. So
That's a separate.
It isn't. It's kind of linked in.
Thing on the statute of limitations.
Well, except for if your statute of limitations is 1 month, it would preclude making complaints about things that are happening during an election.
I see. Yes. Okay.
So the freeze is not that you can't make complaints about that behavior. It's just that you can't do it during the election. You have to wait until after. And so that time frame needs to include that.
Yeah. I just want to throw another wrinkle in on the case that I had to deal with about a year ago, where behavior took place at a ADICC event, and it took some time, I think, for the details of the event to come to people's awareness. So I think that a month might not be long enough for that, right? Because it's not as if things only happen in an open council meeting; they happen in private sometimes. And so a harassment claim or a racist remark, that sort of thing, it might take some time, I think, as Councillor Isaacson was saying, for the individuals involved to come to terms with actually making a complaint. And that might be a personal struggle for one thing. And then secondly, it might take some time for people to become aware that the behavior occurred.
So I'll provide a comment. We're going through a lot of effort to develop a code of conduct. My expectation is everyone will know that this code of conduct is in place.
Yeah.
And the importance of this code of conduct is to ensure that no behavior that's outside of it will be accepted. Therefore, if you, Lisa, feel, you can immediately do this. You don't have to sit around for a month or 3 months or whatever. I just think we're missing an opportunity to get the greatest value for the people we interface with.
So then what's the consensus around the statute of limitations for making a complaint?
So I think all people should be encouraged to come forward as soon as possible. But I don't think you want to exclude people who maybe for whatever reason needed extra time and can put a hold on everything through election periods and still meet the statute of limitations. I think we had a lot of discussions around this at the regional district, and we decided the 6 month, and then depending on the issue, it could, the decision makers could decide to extend that if they wanted to. I like it. Obviously, if you have a complaint, you should make it immediately.
Yeah.
And try to get it resolved. We don't want to be creating blisters and whatnot, but we don't want to be insensitive to where people might need extra time for whatever reason.
So we add something like as soon as possible.
They are invited to.
Councillor Dote.
Yeah, I'm good with the adding as soon as possible in there.
Mhm.
But, to actually take a step to making under the policy like this, the major decision, you have to become aware of the occurrence. You have to have time to wrestle with it, make a decision, to get involved in the process, which even looking at this with 6 months and then 90 days, maybe another 90 days, you're going to be involved in this confrontation, maybe for up to a year or more than a year, and giving people time to make the decision makes sense to me. Put in language to say, encourage that it be done as quickly as possible. And I like the opportunity there for 6 months time frame, and draws the line under it. So beyond the 6 months, other people who might be witnessing are going to be thinking about what happened 7 months of time.
Another quick consideration is, since we are encouraging people to deal with informal resolution outside of this code of conduct first, that might take more than a month. And so it means that you have a very short time pressure on informal resolution if you're trying to reach out to that person directly and, having things cool down, finding a time to meeting a few times, and then you have this pressure of a month. So I support the 6 months as is, but also adding that as, and encouraging as soon as possible.
Yeah, just one comment, if I may, and that is extending the timelines like it is involved with the RD to 6 months, another 6 months. Where you could have the situation where something arises a year before the election. And if some councillor has in mind that maybe before the election is time to bring that forward, extending that timeline for that duration could be problematic for if it's you pull the card before the election, just before, instead of as soon as possible. So I would caution about these extensive timelines. If we're going to deal with something and it's this outrageous, it should be done in a short period of time.
Which I think is a good segue into your initial review of the complaint.
I do like the as soon as possible wording. It's very my issue.
I've voted on it. A good addition. As trying to see, so 15.5 deals with the very first informal resolution. 15.6, if it's not issued within 30 days, it'll go to a dispute professional. But there's no time limitation on that. So time limitation in the next step. Yeah, 60 days. So are you comfortable with those time limits then? So you've got 30 days for informal resolution. That doesn't work. You've got 60 days for a mediated solution. And if that doesn't work, then you're into a third party investigator.
Mhm.
Comfortable with those timelines?
I have a question, or maybe I missed it. Is this process confidential?
Well, that's a decision. And I think it's the next under transparency.
Oh, okay.
Just a little further down. Can you just hold that thought for a minute?
I will, yes, thank you.
If we can just go to the complaint moratorium, so a moratorium during the nomination period. This is what already said. You're comfortable with that?
So that's 6 months prior to an election, no complaints can be filed.
No, the nomination period isn't that long.
Well, this is the RD has it worded a bit different.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, so
First-
complaints with the conduct of a director seeking re-election will not be accepted in the period from the first day of nomination period to the general voting day. So you can't, there might be active complaints before that period.
That's about 6 weeks.
Right. In the event the complaint is filed prior to the first day of the nomination period but remains unresolved by the start of and through the campaign period, the investigation will continue into the next term of the board unless either the complainant or the respondents do not speak or gain re-election. So if you're not running, then it won't continue.
I'm curious what other communities do. You mentioned 6 months in here. Councillor Palm brought up this issue as well. Do other communities have a longer period? Or
I think 6 months is fairly common. From the event, I had one community recently who wanted to say, and I can't remember what it was, it might have been 3 months from the awareness.
I think Nanaimo is 3 months, if I'm not.
But, sorry, this was different. There was awareness of the event. 3 months following awareness of the event as opposed to the event itself, which I thought was interesting.
And the charter has some wording around that for public complaints, right? I don't remember. Sorry. It's something about.
So I think,
Yeah.
I think 6 months, I think this is about, there's an element of fairness. That's how long do you want this to be hanging out there?
my question specifically about the 6 months was the complaint moratorium related to the election.
Complaint moratorium.
Yeah.
I think there's a real range. In the 90 days prior to general voting day, the commissioner may suspend any investigation underway. Prior to general voting day, so a nomination period is, I think, about 6 weeks, right? So it's about twice as long as that, and I think Surrey's was 6 months. So I think there's a real range. So do you have that off the top of your head? I think there's a real range. So 90 days would be 3 months before general election.
I'd be open to like a a bit longer than just the nomination period, like a 90 days? What do people feel?
For the election, I like the RD, it's 90 days. Sorry, is it 90 days?
No, it's just
6 months, I
90
should say, 6 months. A moratorium.
A moratorium.
Yeah, I like the RD, 6 months.
The RD is in 6 months.
Are we talking about moratorium, right?
Yeah, we're talking about moratorium.
Yeah, 6 months is good.
6 months for a moratorium.
So the RD is just that from the first day of the
So 6
nomination
months
period.
prior to the election, you cannot, charge them, lodge a complaint, yeah, so more time in my mind, the better before an election.
Then your statutory has to be longer than the moratorium, so, right?
Right.
Then your period of time for launching a complaint has to be longer than your moratorium in order to allow for covering off behaviors that might have happened.
If you wanted to spin into the next. Except that, just let me go back to this. In the event that a complaint is filed prior to the first day of the nomination period, so let's say filed prior to the 6 months, if you were to change it, but remains unresolved by the start of and through the campaign period, investigation will continue. So if you had a clause like that, the 6 months wouldn't matter.
Yes, it still does.
Yeah.
Because it isn't intended to allow people to behave however they want during the election, during the moratorium. It's just that you don't lodge the complaint until later. So if you're holding on to a complaint for 6 months, waiting for that period to end, you need your statutory limitation to be longer to allow for that complaint to be lodged post-election.
It happened 6 months than a week before the election.
Right.
And someone sat on it for a week, then they're out of their period.
You're right.
So the limitation has to be longer than the moratorium.
15.3A, unless I'm misreading it.
Each of the complaints that were filed.
Well, yeah, that are in process prior to an election. But it talks about it'll continue unless either the complainant or the respondent do not seek or gain re-election. So my initial reading of that is, let's say person A is complained about and by person B. But because of this issue, person B decides not to run. But person A, who has been complained on, does decide to run and is re-elected. Now I could be misreading it, but based on how I'm reading it here, the matter would be null and void because person B is no longer sitting on council. But the person that was complained about is still on council about a complaint that hasn't actually been resolved.
Yeah.
And so I think there needs to be some wiggle room there that if a complaint is applicable in a period of time during an election period, that it can still be processed even after if a re-election happens. And because the person might not want to run again. I could see that happening if someone has a grievance and chooses not to run. And then the grievance isn't solved.
I think one of the problems is, just thinking off the top of my head, one of the problems is if you don't have both parties still, in the local government, then how can you compel them to do anything? And you're not protected, you're not indemnified, you're not subject to confidentiality rules. I think you need both of the parties in the local government in order for the complaint to proceed. Somebody else could make a complaint, I guess, but.
Yeah, because I'm thinking of situations where it's not that like Earl did me harm, it's that I thought Earl did harm generally. And so I'm the complainant, but I'm not actually the one that is necessarily impacted. So it would, in that case, in order to avoid this situation where the investigation gets dropped because I choose not to run for re-election, then would I try to submit a complaint with multiple parties so that we cover our bases in case, because it's not only just between two people. Sometimes the code of conduct issue is about broader issues.
Well, someone else could submit the complaints.
if the time hasn't run out.
Which was back to the,
Yeah.
If somebody has a complaint, they can launch a complaint.
So if you,
You know, that's just, some whole thing doesn't, and it doesn't talk anywhere about somebody being a representative of a group.
I know.
It's an individual having a complaint against another individual.
so let's go back. So if you feel comfortable with 6 months as a period of time to submit a complaint, then let's go back to the question of the moratorium, which is in the regional district one, the nomination period. Do you want to extend that? And if you do, then you have to balance it with the 6 months piece.
so it would make sense to make the moratorium more like 4 months, so that you don't have to keep extending your other thing. But the moratorium is only 4 months, that 6 months still is fine.
So the moratorium is 4 months.
That made sense to me. So if at the nomination period feels too short to some people, and they would like it to be, you know, the pre-period, what we're calling our pre-campaign period or what have you, and we can't make it, you know, so long that the complaints can't get made at all. I mean, that doesn't sit fair, nor is it meet the intent of the conduct document.
So can I just remind you in 15.2 that the chair and CAO are authorized to extend the 6 months deadline if circumstances warrant an extension. So there is
That clause, if the election campaign fit.
some room there.
Yeah.
Because my name is Jack. I was just wondering, Councillor Down and Councillor Elliott speak to, because obviously there's a lot of thought put into this, how the securities, how that was intended to work. When you were discussing the moratorium versus the.
Yeah, I think I have been quite clear that the amount of time you're allowed to make your complaint is enough to make it so that moratorium could happen, and then you could make your complaint afterward. If all the parties that were involved are still in government.
So what I'm hearing at the moment is 6 months with a potential 6 month extension and 4 months for a moratorium.
I would be okay with that.
Well, that,
Yeah, so the, you know, the regional district one isn't 6 months.
No.
The nomination period, like the moratorium, that there is a 6 month submission time frame, and it can be extended.
And the extension doesn't extend it by 6 months. It doesn't specify how long it could be extended. It
Oh,
specifies.
you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. Extend the 6 months, instead of circumstance warrant an extension. Okay, thank you. Okay, transparency. Who will be informed of the complaint? And just can't remember if there's reference to this. Sure there is.
Confidentiality clause in there somewhere.
A clause about this.
Well, transparency
So-
is about information sharing, but not about the actual complaint.
So 15.8 talks about not commenting at open meetings pending the conclusion of the matter with the presentation of the report to the board under 15.3 above. So the board chair shall provide the report or a summary to the board, but it doesn't mention whether that summary would happen in closed or open. So I started by reading 15.18, which is the very last one, and then that one references the conclusion of the matter happens in a report, and that is talked about under 15.13.
Okay, so yeah,
Yeah.
the very last clause.
I think typically what happens is that the investigation, the whole investigation process, the whole mediation process is a closed process. Comes to council, and council decides what is to be released and what's not to be released. That is, I think, the common process. Is that what Nanaimo does too?
No, this is.
Okay, there's, yeah, I got it. 14.1.
So in the Nanaimo code under 4.1.8, there's a section called report to be public. And it mentions that if the commissioner has determined that a council member did violate this bylaw, after the commissioner has delivered a copy to the complainant and council, the city must make the investigation report available to the public.
So they've chosen to include that.
Along that, and B is that it complies with personal disclosure of information, so there may be redactions.
So the charter itself doesn't really protect elected officials from in the same way it would an employee, right? For private information like this. So is it required under the charter that things like that be public, or is that a decision that?
That's generally a decision of council.
Okay.
So I can think of a couple of cases where the council has decided to resolve the circumstances in a closed meeting and haven't released any information about it. Particularly in the one case that immediately comes to mind is where the complaint was found to be invalid. The complaint is invalid, so there was no public disclosure of that at all. In other cases, I don't know that the investigator, I'm thinking of another case, I'm not sure that the investigator's report was released, but council released information and released the sanctions.
I feel like in reading up for this topic, I feel like some of the information that gets brought out as a part of this section 90 applies. Like, we can't keep it closed unless there's a reason for it to stay closed. So like if we're in the course of the matter are receiving legal advice, etc., but at some point there's a responsibility to disclose to the public.
Those are for our meetings where we're all in attendance.
Yeah, she's right, section.
Yeah, I just mean that this process isn't necessarily being done by council. It's not a meeting, it's a separate process.
Yeah, but when we decide whether or not to accept the recommendations from the investigator or the mediator or what have you.
Okay. Yeah, I get it.
How does that get?
Or the investigator's a lawyer, then you're probably covered. If the investigator's not.
Because it's legal advice.
It'd be legal advice. I don't know, I think maybe we should do a little bit of work on this one.
I think there's so many nuances, like if something's almost borderline, could also be a complaint plus criminal.
Yeah.
You know, you get into at least a few others.
So that's another question. If it's criminal, it just shouldn't be in very long.
Yeah.
And I don't think the regional district includes that. You should just be content.
Or like a civil where somebody is indeterminate. Maybe there's a couple things we should do for you.
The whole confidentiality is wrapped up in 1518. Yeah, member elected to repeat this policy by another member. All members shall refrain from commenting on such allegations at open meetings or generally make any public comment or such a complaint pending the conclusion of the matter with the presentation of the report to the board under 1513 above. And the report has to be there and it's presented to council. So council, and nobody else can do it. So council can determine if there's going to be a response. Sure, all of the possible list of things that council can do if they find that somebody has breached the code. So basically 1518 says, once somebody has made a complaint, everybody will keep their mouth shut. And the invention and the investigation will go on until such time as there is a report. And if there is no investigator appointed, and there is no report that comes because it's been mediated or come to an agreement, there is nothing for anybody to report, and it remains confidential forever.
Right. I think the question is,
I think that's the logic that's going.
yeah, I think so too. I think the question is, if you go back to 1515, the question is that can that report can be submitted in a closed meeting? And I guess, and I think that that's a question that we really need to get some advice on, because I guess what I'm thinking of is behavior that might impact your staff. So say it's sexual harassment, right? There might be information in the room that you really need to keep it close to me. So
then
I think we need to ask some questions.
wouldn't that be the corporate officer's decision about whether something should be in camera or not, based on the actual rules?
It's always council's decision. Yeah. Corporate officer is going to give you advice, but at the end of the day, it's council's decision to make sure it's.
Well, if there's legally stuff within the report that needs to be in camera, they would tell us.
Yes. And then council will determine, so determine if it goes to a closed meeting or open meeting. So I think that I'm just not sure that you can make a blanket.
Well, I mean, if the report has content that is legally has to not be in public, then we can't very well have it in a public meeting. And so the content of the report would determine whether it was public or not public based on the community charter guidelines, right?
I think it's like all in-camera reports.
Yeah, it depends on what you're talking
You
about.
have an in-camera report, if it's appropriate to be in camera, the council discusses it in camera. If you make a decision on information that has to remain in camera, you end up rising and reporting. You adjourn the meeting and you rise and report that Councillor Dowd has been found guilty of this and will not be allowed to go to any more committee meetings. And that's what gets reported.
So I think, you know, one, I'd like some other advice on this, but also I think 15.13 just makes a reference to a meeting, it doesn't say open or closed. Whereas in IMOs, it requires you to be open, the report has to go to open, but I guess I would worry a little bit about that, right? So I think being silent on that leaves the option up to council to consider, okay, well, what's the substance of this report, and should it be an open or closed?
On the 11.
Yeah, just to clarify the process, Councillor Doe was obviously involved in a code of conduct violation or charge at some point. We, I believe in the public or on council, did not hear a word about it until the decision had come down from the court involved. Is that correct?
No,
Or did you go to the public before that?
I've never been involved in code of conduct complaint.
Oh, I thought there was a complaint.
It was
The record.
providing an example.
Over the complaint is, no one is to comment in an open meeting about a complaint until such time as reported. So let's just go to this section.
It was a court case.
It
It was the court case that came down, right? Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify.
So 15.18, legislative breach of this policy guideline, where all members shall refrain from commenting on such allegations at open meetings or generally make any public subject complaint pending the conclusion of the matter with presentation or report. And then I think at that point, so if you have a report, it comes to council, then you decide whether it should go to an open or closed meeting.
Right.
I know you need to do some more research, and then IMO under 4.1.9, 10 and 11, 12 talks about that confidentiality piece. One thing that I'm unclear about is about disclosure to the rest of council. So for example, if I make a complaint against Councillor Southcott here about something that multiple people knew was going on, but then Councillor Almeida separately was like, oh, that thing that Councillor Southcott did, I also maybe need to do something about that, but he doesn't even know that procedure's already in place. Like, is it helpful or harmful for us to disclose that something has started? And I'm not sure what the answer is.
I can just tell you about my current experience with another municipality. The complaint, there's an attempt to resolve the complaint informally, and nobody else knows.
Yeah.
Not at all. So I think, and I think that to reduce the impact on the organization, I actually think that's a pretty good process. Now, I'll tell you, in this particular case, the informal resolution was not successful, and it's going into a formal process. And at that point, I believe the whole council will be aware of this complaint.
Well, and so that's the question when you mentioned if it's going to the stage 2, I don't think we have a provision about notification of council and whether or when that's appropriate. I haven't.
One of the precepts of this at the beginning is where there is a personal complaint between two people. One person is complaining about somebody else's actions. But the most positive way to resolve that is if the two people get together individually, come to a conclusion, possibly they negotiate a realization that the other has been hurt and a sincere apology is made, and they go away. There's nothing on Facebook about it. There is nothing in the beach. It's not talked about by anybody, and that is, in my view, a very successful resolution of an interpersonal problem. You know, that's really, I think, the way to think about these things. Is hopefully, if the code of conduct works, first off, you hope there are no complaints, and then if there are complaints, you hope they get resolved person to person, and you don't need to involve everybody on council. If you start to say, well, after 3 weeks, we'll tell everybody in public exactly who's complaining about who, then the process that starts is everybody in the community starts deciding whose side they're on without knowing any facts. And it turns into a big problem. That's why the confidentiality matters.
I think you maybe misunderstood, or I wasn't clear in how I was talking, not about public disclosure, but disclosure to this group. In some cases, like some of this is interpersonal, but sometimes it's not. Like if there's a breach related to gifts or other things in here, it's not interpersonal, it's more about upholding the code. And so that's where I am unclear about what the benefits are about disclosures, about, you know, escalation to the rest of council. In a closed meeting as part of the process. I don't know. That's why I'm.
I think that'd be my position. But if you have a code of conduct complaint and you decide before it's resolved to make it public at some point, you're losing the possibility of actually getting people who are going to be part of the process. And that's the key to it too, is the ability and the requirement actually in this code that if someone complains about you, participate in the process. Otherwise, if someone is complaining about it on something you did, and you know it's going to become public next week or on some particular day.
But I wasn't talking about public, Jordan.
And public means if everybody in council is going to know, because you might not want to.
So once the process has been completed, it's up to council to determine through the recommendations what to do. So that I think disclosure would compromise that process, because council has to remain as open as possible until they receive the report. I think that the clause that says we don't talk about it until that report is the right way to go. Because in this situation, we're then the jury that hears the evidence, and we should hear it all at the same time, and we should be hearing it in the same way from the same place. You know, so in order to keep council as open as possible about the outcomes and what to do about the report when it comes forward, they're not to be offside communications prior to. So that's like, I'm thinking in a judicial type way, and how do we make it fair and as impartial as possible?
So you would be advocating for a process that keeps a very small number of people involved until either it's resolved amicably or a report is delivered to council.
I think that is how we retain the fairest mind possible. I could hear someone tell me something different, but I think that was the intent behind 1518.
Let's go with that. If there's, I see nodding heads. Go with that and you can muse on it.
Muse.
Muse
My
on it.
muse.
So confidential until informally resolved or report submitted.
But if it's informally resolved, does it even need to be reported?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So it's confidential until it's released or the report comes.
Okay.
So council is unaware of a complaint. It would be unaware, totally unaware if it's resolved informally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Sorry, I think you just quite say that right. And then we talk penalties. And then we'll talk about legal fees, and then we'll talk about social media. I just
I have one more
mentioned criminal.
thought.
Yep.
So as I was thinking about how we make decisions pending, so how are the complainant and the like when you're making decisions at the end, the people involved in the process are obviously have conflicts, right? How about the person that's been aware the whole time and adjudicating? Their information would be different, right? So complaints made to the mayor's involved the entire time, understands everything. Does that preclude him from deciding at the end what to do with the report? Or is that just like being on a committee? So he's on the committee, right? He's on the committee because he's running the process around complaint resolution.
The mayor is just the complaint is about the mayor.
No. Nobody's complaining about the mayor.
Okay.
I'm just talking about fair to make, you know how you're supposed to keep an open mind until the end of the process and then you all hear it together.
He receives the complaint.
Oh, okay.
And passes it off, right? But not necessarily involved in the process.
Well, he would be aware of the complaint. He would know where it was in the stages and whether it was informally resolved or not informally resolved. He would know whether there was a mediator involved or whether there was an investigator, those kinds of things.
He
No?
receives the
Okay.
complaint, right?
Yeah.
I think the CAO would be aware of the process.
And she's not on the council. Okay, gotcha.
Right.
Thank you. I just was trying to wrap my head around it.
Yeah.
Right, and the people involved directly in the complaint have conflicts, so they would withdraw and you'd be left with folks who were not involved. Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Wrapping my head around that whole thing.
What would the person who made the complaint not be part of the decision-making body that is responding to the report?
Correct.
Yeah, I think I have to check that. The voting at the end, the complainant is.
We received the investigation and the recommendations. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna check that.
Or legal requirement.
Yeah.
That'd be a conflict.
There's very few opportunities to exclude somebody
Exactly.
from the regional district board meeting to exclude somebody from the council meeting.
So
That's
okay.
But if the findings of the investigator were actually against the person who made the complaint, then they would obviously be. To me, I feel like they both are in conflict on that decision because they're very involved in the entire process.
I think that
But yeah, you need to
there
check.
might be some legal precedent. So I think we can get some.
I think it's your legal.
Okay, so this is entirely up to you. There's a lot of detail around this when you make certain choices. Other things you have to do with your remuneration bylaw, some of your finance bylaws. So knowing that, but what are the kind of penalties that you want to include? I've listed here, apology, training, censure, removal of appointments, internal appointments, external appointments, removal or reduction of remuneration, removal of access or funding for conferences and travel, limitations on access to staff or municipal offices, limitations on access for confidential information. And then just another category within your authority. And I think that they parallel
15.11D, page 10.
And 11, yeah.
so letter of reprimand, public censure, apology, removal from committees, commissions, training, volunteer hours is in the RD1, prohibition of representing the district at events or attending seminars, charitable donations, access to staff, and other sections. So there's basically the only one that's missing is remuneration.
Well, also the removal from the acting mayor rotation, and it mentions committees, but I don't think it mentions external appointments. So those could be two that could be options.
So one approach is that council puts aside on these lists, but additional ones could be brought forward. Councilor Dowd.
I like the language in the document in front of us. It's got that important,
May.
all important one at the bottom that says others within council authority. Council can be creative in getting something appropriate that is right.
Yeah.
As a note, regional district had to modify or amend its remuneration bylaw to make sure it was consistent.
Right.
And that council could do the things on the list.
Right. So you would add the acting mayor and external appointments?
I don't think you have to add a lot of things. I think council could do that on their own because council appoints the acting mayor rotation.
Mhm.
You know, it's within the power of council to do that. And if you have that line down there, it's probably one of the things within council's authority. You don't limit yourself.
We might have to amend the procedure bylaw to do that, though.
Yeah.
I think it's in a procedure bylaw that we would have to amend. Yeah. But we can do that too.
Procedure bylaw. Decide.
Oh, I see.
The acting mayor will be.
So then the question is, so are you just comfortable with?
It looks fine.
Yeah,
I mean,
okay,
And it's qualified by May at the beginning anyway, which means it's not all inclusive and.
Yeah.
yeah, I just want to state a little bit of a dissent. So the investigator will recommend some options, and then it's up to the council to decide what to do with them. I think it's to add clarity and options in the list, because sometimes, especially for new people on a council who haven't been a part of these conversations, you don't know what you don't know. And so the fact that, for example, remuneration isn't specifically listed here, or the deputy mayor appointments isn't listed here, like those are common ones that I think are worth adding. I agree that that last line, any other sanction that is within the authority, needs to remain there, but I think some added specificity and just like 3 extra clauses or whatever that would be, doesn't, I think would add to it as opposed to make it weaker. But it's helpful to have that clarity, would be my argument.
Sorry, Council, as Eagle Eye, Lisa here. 15.15 deals with the remuneration.
Yeah, it's a separate clause.
So it is there, and I think it's separated out because of its connection to the remuneration.
Oh, okay, yep, good eye.
But you're right, the one that's not in it is removal from an acting mayor or external.
I have a question about the limitations on access, retention of confidential information. Is that even allowed? Like, how could?
Yeah, you know what happens? Seeing happens in some unfortunate cases where the elected officials are only allowed to look at confidential information in City Hall.
Oh,
So they can't take it with them. So they're not provided with digital copies. I don't know if you guys do that. Anyways, lots of places don't provide digital versions of confidential information. And in lots of places, you distribute the paper and collect it at the end of the meeting, and you have a checklist, right? But in some extreme cases, they're really limited to where they can view confidential information. So yeah, it does happen.
I think we could tighten that up a bit. I know that in one instance related to the wastewater treatment plant, we did not provide you with information other than the lawyer displayed it to you. That was very deliberate, but I don't know that we other than that, we can tighten that up. Thank you very much.
So, the remuneration is in there, just following up on Councillor Isaacson's comment. Is there an interest in adding the acting mayor and external appointments, or just leave it alone?
I think it's okay to add any possible remedies there, but the point being that it's not possible to have an exhaustive list and there is flexibility.
Yeah.
I think what Councillor Isaacson is looking for is our best ability to provide information about what's possible for people who don't know. So whatever people want to add in there doesn't hurt, because we don't have to choose any of them. They're just possibilities, right? So.
And since just adding one item without adding 5 other things, then I'd be in favor of this. Yeah, adding the acting mayor location as a 12th item. Use that.
So then the other thing, and yeah, I don't know if there's is there an indemnification clause in here?
In terms of, sorry,
Where you pay for legal fees?
in terms of if somebody is found to be.
No, actually, what I've seen elsewhere is this, I think, is the safe way to do it, is at the discretion of the council. You will provide legal fees for either the complainant or the respondent.
I've known councils doing that, so it might be worth putting it in there, because often the request is made so that an individual council member doesn't have to incur their own fees to address a complaint. I don't know if I don't see it in here.
I don't see it in there. It's a complicated question. If you're gonna decide to pay legal fees, I don't know how you could decide to pay legal fees for one party. Because somebody would have to make a decision that one party is the good party that deserves to have their legal fees paid, and the other one is the bad party that has to pay them themselves. So
Or you provide for both.
I think your only opportunity is to say, you'll either won't have lawyers involved, or you'll pay the legal fees of both parties, or you can have lawyers, but you won't pay anybody.
Right.
That's, and I don't know exactly what the law would be on that, if they're having a process that might, for people who break some money, and if you can't do that, we're going to have legal argument.
So one of the purposes for a Code of Conduct is to try to have an alternate dispute resolution process that does not involve the courts. And if people find that the resolution that they come to at the end is not to their, they think they somehow were, it wasn't handled correctly or what have you, they can always go to the courts to challenge that. And so there shouldn't be legal fees until throughout the process. This is an alternate process, right? And so everybody can always appeal anything to the courts. That's how we do it in this country. But at the point where you appeal something to the courts, do we not have guidance already around through the charter and so forth for those kinds of things?
Well, I think it's not uncommon for somebody who is the respondent to want to have some legal advice through the process. So I've seen them ask for legal advice. So will the corporation pay for it? That's the question, right? So you're right, this isn't a court process.
No.
But it is a legal process.
Right. So this process also talks about the possibility for vexatious or whatever decisions that could equally impact the person bringing the complaint forward. So if you're going to indemnify one, you got to do them both. Because before making a complaint, someone might want to get some legal advice around what it is they're complaining about as well.
By the way, Stephen and I looks like they considered this in one section, so we can get our advice, but we can work out things like reimbursement of legal fees.
In Nanaimo, for example, reimbursement could happen if it's the first process and the amount does not exceed 10,000. So if someone is the respondent to a complaint because they keep breaching the code of conduct, they get advice that first time, but not if they keep doing it.
Okay, so we'll maybe get some advice on that, right? And we can provide some options, right?
Yeah, I think when you're getting the advice, the initial process is trying to get two people to find a resolution themselves. And then the next step is you're bringing somebody else in. And so I'd like to see whether or not people have said, okay, no legals, step one, no legal step two, but if it gets to step three, then we would consider legal reimbursement. So just like to know what others are doing.
Yeah, that's good.
As an option, yeah.
This is the thing that I'm reporting.
Okay. Okay, so we'll give that some thought. Then the last three, again, communication, social media. So there is a section in here that addresses social media, but it relies on their social media policy, which you don't have.
Yeah.
So we really want us to try to craft something that would give some guidance around social media.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons that I think about it is a lot of the items under the social media policy, I think, relate to all communication with the public. And so there is an element of social media in there as well. But I think, for example, if we're speaking with the public not on social media, we should also refrain from using defamatory remarks, et cetera, right? So it's, I think there's an opportunity to integrate them a little bit, I think would be my suggestion, especially at this point, since we don't have a social media policy. I I think, and the public and the media clause, I think Nanaimo, because they're a municipality, not a regional district, is a little bit more clear and relevant to our situation.
So the section on communication generally in the regional districts one, we can probably just incorporate. It's the section on social media, which is separate, right?
Yeah.
That's the previous one, communication social media. And we could include the content from there, particularly 9.3, 9.4. And take out the references to their bylaws. Or so, I'm sorry, to their policy.
I kind of like the concept of having a social media policy. And then having the code of conduct refer to the social media policy. So we don't have a social media policy in one place and the social media comments within the code of conduct in another place. And over the years, they become different. But you have one document that gets changed and people forget to change the other.
Actually creating social media.
So that's my point, is creating a social media policy wasn't relevant 10 years ago. I think it is now. And having one social media policy that gets referred to in the code of conduct makes more sense to me. Rather than having similar language in two different places.
It's not what the QRD goes.
Staff too. So what is this?
That's not, yeah, just that's the versus so that's something that potentially could be part of the communication, you know, kind of communications plan, so it could be wrapped into that. But what could we do sooner to embed in this?
So the wording in the QRD thing isn't strictly just the social media policy. It has stuff in here.
It's two parts to it.
So
and most of it is pretty good sense. It's, if you wouldn't do it in public, don't do it on your social media. If you wouldn't allow it in your public meeting, then don't allow it on your social media.
and I would suggest it. They just said the provisions of the Code of Conduct bylaw apply without limitation to the use of a member's personal and official social media accounts, so it holds everything to the same standard. And members must regularly monitor their social media accounts and immediately take measures to deal with publication messages or postings made by others on their behalf that violate the terms of this code of conduct. That's how they address it.
Yeah, I kind of like that because, for example, the fact that we should be speaking for ourselves, not on behalf of council, is addressed somewhere else, and that applies everywhere, including on social media. I think that the piece around members will refrain from using or permitting their social media accounts for the purposes that include defamatory remarks and kind of the whole section 9.3. I mean, we shouldn't anywhere, including on social media, but anywhere, be promoting illegal activity or having negative statements disparaging staff. So if I'm, at a ratepayer society meeting or what have you. So to me, that's almost more related to respectful behavior writ large, that social media would apply to that, but it's not only social media.
I think though that the distinction for the social media is like in 9.3, permitting the use of their social media. So it's not just about you, it's about other people
that are managing, like if someone's
contributing to your account.
Yeah, and so, and if there's a post or whatever that's getting out of control, you need to shut off comments if you can't maintain policing it, which is nearly impossible. At our hours of week and day and whatever, these things happen. And so, yeah, the way to do that is to shut off your comments. But,
right.
Yeah.
So I think that's why that distinction is made. The regional has Facebook page, right?
Yeah, I'm going to support what Councillor Doubt said about the city having a social media policy. For example, if somebody gives a thumbs up, what does that mean? It's an issue that everybody should collectively know. And if it's a thumbs up and everybody recognizes they're a councillor, does that mean that they're speaking on behalf? So there's a lot of intricacies around social media that people will pick up, and the more definition we have. Councillor Doubt said social media isn't going to go away.
So do you want us to be silent on the social media part in the draft code of conduct? Or do you want us to adapt this?
The other alternative is security is actually their social media policy was done in 2022. It's circulated, we take a look at it, see if.
Document same time sort of thing.
Did you also,
Adapt and adopt, yeah.
did you also put in their scope at the beginning of the code of conduct policy that policy applies to board committee members and to all interactions in relation to security matters? Interaction with staff, with the public, and during these, that's like the beginning.
Just a quick question, with your experience, this has been around for a little while now and social media continues to evolve. How many jurisdictions are moving away from or retaining this in their code, also having a supplementary policy?
You know what, I couldn't say. I really couldn't say. I think either way, if you have a policy that governs the behavior of the council and it's a standalone one, it's going to have the same effect as putting it in here.
Yeah. What I might propose with the QRDs, it applies to the QRD in its entirety, so staff, the corporation council. So it's, looks fairly comprehensive.
And the value of having a separate
Applies to different people.
policy that apply to everybody. Applies outside of the code of conduct. That's plain inside the code of conduct that social media policy applies. Everything to do with the code of conduct.
Yeah, I think if it's included in the code of conduct, then somebody can make a complaint about it.
Yeah.
If it's outside the code of conduct, not eligible for a complaint.
I don't actually have any problem with how the QRD has handled the issue in their document. What I don't know is if the social media policy, which is broadly applied to a lot of people, has any conflicts with the union agreements or anything like that, and whether that's different over there than here. And so it could take quite a while to vet that because its application is broader to whom it applies to. It's hard to reference the social media policy unless we have one. So we either have to take it out of here and add it in later once it's adopted, or adopt them together, I guess, process-wise.
I think you could just take the content of the regional district one, take the references to their political media policy out, and just put the content in.
Yeah, and then if the intention is to have a social media policy later, we can add it in later. Yeah.
So am I correct when I heard you, the reason that it's inside the code of conduct is for protection of the individual counselor from outside?
No,
interference?
it makes it eligible for complaint.
So taking it out doesn't?
If you have a standalone social media policy, but not being a code of conduct, then you can make a complaint about it. You only make a complaint about what's in the code of conduct.
It would have to
Now,
be referenced.
Yeah, you have to be referenced. Now, having said that, there's probably, the foundational principles of respect. For example, you could probably allege that somebody has been disrespectful in their social media account, and therefore you could make a complaint that. But this is very specific. I think especially with respect to monitoring, your social media account, that you need to be responsible not only for your own behavior, but the behavior of others that are on your social media account. That would then be eligible if you're not monitoring it. Somebody could make a complaint about them. But if you take it out, then
I mean,
you're eligible for complaint.
the QRD version, as Jessica mentioned, references like this covers, behaviors, blah, 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 including during their use of social media. So social media is fair game. Even if the general clause is removed, it still applies to respect and integrity and all of those things.
Good point.
So last couple of things I just wanted to touch on. I don't see in here anything that says if the investigator comes aware, once it gets to the investigator point, becomes aware that this is a criminal matter, that it gets sent to the police. And I've seen that elsewhere, and you don't want to be dealing with criminal matters in your code of conduct. I don't know that I won't do that, but I've seen it elsewhere, so you might want to consider that you just let go of it and let the criminal process deal with it.
I can think of an example on the island where there was a criminal complaint against a council member. But the council still went through this process because they still wanted to speak, I think in this case, censure that councillor because their criminal behavior, impacted the integrity of the council. And, so it was a dual.
I think they suspended their action until the criminal investigation was complete.
Okay.
Then they sanctioned.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I think if we're thinking about the same one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I was gonna say, not completely council related, but a similar situations happened in hockey right now, whereas a junior team from 2018, 5 players that are all playing pro hockey have all been criminally charged. The league has done their own investigation, but until the criminal proceedings are done, the league is mum on the findings of their investigation. So it can be done both ways, I guess.
yeah, I was gonna say that sometimes there's a criminal investigation and you can't tamper with it or do anything until they're done, but in that process, they may not proceed to prosecution for whatever reason. They may not feel their case is fully made, but then that falls back on council to do something.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it could be wording to the effect of just putting everything on hold until if you become aware that there's a criminal investigation on the same topic, then you need to cooperate with that or what have you.
Interesting situation. If you could have the investigator decide, investigator thinks this could be criminal. The investigator is not a judge,
Mhm.
not a prosecutor. Decide it could be criminal. Decide to stop the investigation.
Right, and then the Crown doesn't do anything either.
Meanwhile, the complainant that's complained about this thing, that they want something done about it, and nothing's happening.
Mhm.
So what will they say if they're not happy that their investigation has been put on the shelf by an investigator who made a mistake? Turns out it's not criminal, and district attorney or whoever it is won't press charges, so nothing's happened for 3 years. Well, it's a justice system. So there's I think it's a real sticky, particular situation of what Councillor Alameda is talking about, is where once you begin an investigation, one's the appropriate place to stop. or suspended, and how do you know you're making the right decision? Because somebody might second guess it 8 years from now.
Where we could actually get legal advice, if it looks like it might be something like that. Instead of an investigator who may not have that expertise. But it looks like.
That's why I mentioned we need to cooperate with the Crown, because the Crown's not doing anything. They're gonna be fine with you moving ahead. But, and the situations are often determined by the actual thing that's happening, and there's no way for us to make a policy that covers all eventualities. But cooperation with the Crown's investigations is needed, right?
Yeah, but I don't think the Crown's obliged or they have to share anything, so they can be like, well, screw you, do your own thing. And so I'm not no legal expert, but I don't think there's anything stopping someone from investigating something while the Crown is investigating at the same time.
Oh, no, if they want you to cease and desist activity, they'll tell you.
Yeah, well,
I think though, it's one thing to meet the criminal bar, it's something else to meet the
Code of conduct.
conduct bar, right? So again, I know a case where something was sent off to the police to investigate. They said, no, this is not gonna go anywhere. And then the council took it back and made some determinations. So I think they're two separate processes, but maybe while the criminal investigation is going on and is concluding, you wanted to suspend your consideration of that.
So it would seem to me that if I filed a complaint and the city said, well, this is illegal criminal issue, and I say, well, I'm not going to give any information because I don't think it is. So what's the Crown going to do? The person doesn't think there's been any criminal activity. He's not complying or assisting the Crown. Seems to me that.
So the complainant?
Yeah, because we said before, what happens if the complainant doesn't believe this is a criminal matter?
It doesn't
And he
want
doesn't want to get involved. But he doesn't want to leave charges. So the Crown's going to say, what are you guys talking about? Oh, go away and deal with it.
That's my point.
The clauses that I've seen, if the investigator believes into a criminal matter, he or she goes it on to the police, not the complainant.
No, but would that not be insulting to the complainant? You know, not to have asked the complainant, well, you know, in my opinion, this is a criminal matter, and the complainant says, no, it isn't. I'm not getting involved in any criminal activity because I don't believe it is. That's the situation I'd like to avoid.
I feel like this is the situation where we get legal counsel when the situation arises. I feel like there's so many hypotheticals here. It's hard to say unless there's existing wording. Because I agree, people may not want to press charges, but it still impacts, for example, their relationship with other counselors, and they want that to be resolved, but there's no interest to go through a criminal system for whatever reason. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it does.
Yeah. There's one item in the Nanaimo code that's not in, or there's a few, but one that's not related to reprisals and obstruction. And kind of like the kind of a whistleblower policy. I'd like to see that included.
So this is to protect the.
Yeah.
You're right, that's interesting that that's not in.
Reprisals or what?
And obstruction. So it's basically if I make a complaint, say about Councillor Southcott, and he threatens or you know, activate
Counter complaints because he's mad at you.
or even, you know, eggs my car or, you know, who knows. then, yeah, so anyways, something against reprisals or, and also tampering evidence and blah, 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 but it's meant to, we're all entering this in good faith, and this just helps solidify that, I think. Is the intention.
Anything else that is missing in your opinion?
I think what I find interesting is how the experiences of my former employer has dictated what they've got.
Yeah.
So hopefully, yes, never have those pieces that Councillor Isaacson is wanting to include, but it's a lived experience, lessons learned. Yeah, it's just interesting.
So, I failed to read the NaNoWriMo. How does the clause work? Like, is there a pen, like, how does it work?
The whole section is considerably longer than the regional district.
Yeah.
Because as our CEO pointed out, they have a long history of issues.
The more details you try to put in, better chance there is of missing a detail.
Yeah.
And the more specific you make it,
Yeah.
more specific everything has to be.
Well, and I don't think it can be
Retaliation.
standalone either, right? It
There
would
may
have
very
to,
well be complaint opportunities within the policy, the way it exists.
well, the reason I asked is because the reprisals and obstructions section would have to be referenced in the powers of the investigator in order to have any teeth, right?
Well, it mentions if, like it talks about if someone has been.
That's the thing in this, the experience of security is all of these things you can adapt and amend as times change. So I think speaking to Councillor Dales, he's there is, should times change, you can, we can do this pretty quickly for you if you come up with something you want to amend. We just have to give you a good foundation to start with.
And usually the amendments get made after you've gone through a complaint process.
And
and then you're required to revise this or look at it after every election. So it's a perfect opportunity to revise it then. I think, 3 years from now, it's likely to be a different world. Local governments will have learned more.
I'm aware of previous experience in the RD leading to language that the RD file contains as well. Like when I read through it carefully, it seemed pretty relevant to the situation in the last term. So I'm wondering, is in terms of reprisals, would not a counter complaint serve to address that? Like,
yeah,
I
that's true.
considered it before, but in the interest of keeping things simple.
I'm trying to save the door and probably try to say it in a different way. So just about anything that's a reprisal would be a violation of the code by itself.
True.
That would lead to another complaint. If I've made somebody who made a complaint against me and I egged their client, this example, there will be another complaint that Councillor Dowd egged my car, and it's a bad thing to do all by itself. Under the policy as it exists, without any special language about reprisals. And obstruction, well, you're already required to cooperate. And if you're obstructing, you're not cooperating. So you need to say you need to cooperate. It's not an obstruction. You just say you need to cooperate.
One thing when you spell something out, if it's something that might make it easier for somebody to come forward because it's in there and they have some comfort rather than assuming that that's one of the pros.
I think the main reason, I agree, if Councillor Southgate eggs my car, that is, violates the code of conduct. if it's part of an existing investigation, it means not starting from scratch with the code of conduct complaint process. It's kind of a part of something that's already in motion, and therefore saves the,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Fast, and more fast track.
but it's,
That's the one who egged my house.
yeah.
I have tomatoes, but I wouldn't waste it.
Uh,
They're old.
It's been a recurring problem in my house, actually. People egging my house is a recurring problem in here.
Okay, so the process going forward.
Yeah.
Is, I will draft. Please, again, this very probably the regional districts, which I'm assuming they're okay with. And, make the changes that we discussed today, plus get some advice about a number of issues that we're just not sure. And then on that consideration.
So, not by tomorrow then?
That, yes.
Give it the weekend.
Yeah, no, not by tomorrow. That's great. Yeah.
Last time I looked, it was about 2:30 and there was nobody in the downstairs.
We got really boring.
Yeah.
That's what always happens.
There's,
They think we're gonna be juicy and then they get boring.
Be there for quite a while.
but the people probably are still watching online, so we can give them away.
He loves the sausage making, right?
Or the sausage. I don't know what we're talking about anymore.
Okay, that's, I think, my job for the day.
You mentioned next up, so tomorrow's workshop, is there anything that we are expected to do in advance or?
Actually, I have to give them up. Because this would be your nighttime reading. I know, you're so, look at that enthusiasm.
Right?
Workshop.
I was a policy writer in another life.
Did they give you the staff's recommendations on changes to procedure manual that we never got to yet?
I haven't, changes to the procedure bylaw? Are there some in the works?
Yes,
Yeah.
we're going to have another workshop. So, we've had regular meetings and so forth, so we'll be that's a little bit. There's some changes to policy, but,
Are they mechanics or are they substantive?
Some of them are substantive.
Somewhere very substantive.
What do you want?
But it's.
Extra?
Take one.
Did
Did you get one?
Process.
Oh, Is that something else?
which is, yes.
Is that homework?
Yeah. So,
Okay, so maybe,
Wait a minute, I only need one.
Yeah.
maybe, are they summarized in some easy format?
oh, it's
If
just
you
tomorrow.
think you can help us through that? Bring it to our attention when we go through the, okay. That's my intention, actually, is to walk through the bylaw.
Oh, okay.
Because, sorry, you got a copy of this.
I did, thank you.
I
How
think,
long it is, God.
so staff had some recommended changes, but I think one of the reasons we
I think we
referred
need
it.
one more. Do you have a?
I don't have one of those.
Yeah, we need one more.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons we referred it to workshop is that council ourselves may have other suggested substantive changes, and so. And I think tomorrow is not meant to be about decision making, it's meant to be a learning opportunity, it's not a formal meeting, so.
Yeah, it's to be about talking about the
Yeah, yeah.
process, so, well, I have two. Again, I'm just taking instruction here, but I'm taking instructions from you, but, my understanding is that, there's interest in talking about your meetings, how you conduct your meeting, maybe questions about, the procedure bylaw, about the requirements of how you conduct your meetings. And so I thought we'd have a discussion about meetings in general and, talk about why you have meetings, what information you need at your meetings, and then some of the details of the procedure bylaw about how, for example, I watched some of your council meetings, and I think, talking about raising points of order, what's the process? What's the process? What's the person who raises the points of order? What are they supposed to do? What's the chair or the mayor supposed to do? And let's have a fulsome discussion about this so that you can use that.
Is tomorrow's meeting also the same format with open and the whole works?
Oh.
Okay.
So,
It's not a meeting.
It's a workshop. Okay. And it's in the room?
Well, tomorrow we're having a workshop, not a meeting.
So,
And I just.
yeah, please.
Oh, I was surprised to see the agenda. What I thought the agenda for tomorrow. Because we've been working on changing this board's procedure bylaw since about a year now. So we've had a draft come back from the council. We discussed that for budget time at council, and we're to do a workshop to talk about a whole bunch of proposed things. Just down earlier in the week saying, is this the workshop about our procedure bylaw where we talk about possible changes to the procedure bylaw? I sent that email because if that's what we were going to be doing today, I wanted to spend last night from when I got home until I went to bed comparing the two, so we could talk about it intelligently, but I didn't do that because I was told that what we were going to do was talk about meeting policy or procedures in general. And that's fine. But, I think we need to have some focus about what we're doing. If we're going to talk in detail about our council procedure bylaw, that deserves some preparation somewhere. Instead of just hearing that stuff, make a decision and then we'll bring it to council again in a couple of weeks.
Also, and I apologize if there's been any confusion. We had the option to give Alice notice here, already here. And one of the thoughts that I had was that regardless of future changes to procedure bylaw, there's some things that require good clarity in how the council is able to practice different elements. And so while the idea isn't, what it may do is highlight to us where there needs to be for the changes to propose to, but the intention is not to have you go on the laptop meeting, but to go through how you're doing right now with this document and just the practice in general. And to hear from us some best practices or things that she sees that are working well for us. So I hope that helps a bit.
And maybe the discussion will inform, the future discussion about specific changes. Councils, I mean, some of them are discretionary, they're up to you, and some of them are not. Section not if you.
I would look at this more but as a training and educational opportunity. Meetings and something that is a build up of probably what you did during orientation, a refresher, and time to ask questions with council members who've now been practicing different things and I can get funky, is there a different way of doing it? But we will be looking at a proper workshop for an appropriate time to go through the procedure bylaw in detail. But this is almost like an opportunity to look at things in general. Thank you.
great.
Thanks.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much for your diligence.
Motion to adjourn?
All in favor?